when Mark Sullivan discovered the handwritten note his 8-year-old daughter had hidden in her backpack. "Your dad deserves to be happy again." He had no idea it would lead him to a love story that would heal both their broken hearts. Before we dive into this heartwarming story, don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story, and leave a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to hear your story too. The autumn rain drummed against the kitchen windows of the small colonial house on Maple Street, creating rivulets that caught the warm glow of the overhead pendant lights. Mark Sullivan sat at the oak dining table that had once hosted family dinners for 3, now set for homework sessions between father and daughter. The familiar ritual of Tuesday evening math problems spread before them. Emma's second-grade workbook, 3 sharpened pencils, arranged with military precision, and a glass of chocolate milk that had left its customary ring on the placemat. "Dad, I can't remember if 7 plus 6 is 13 or 14, Emma said. Her brow furrowed in concentration as she gripped her pencil with the intense focus only an 8-year-old could muster over simple addition. Mark leaned over, catching the faint scent of strawberry shampoo from her freshly washed hair. At 34, he had mastered the art of French braids through YouTube tutorials, conquered the mystery of matching socks through color-coded organization, and learned that children's tears could be soothed with equal parts patience and chocolate chip cookies. "Let's count it together," he suggested gently, pulling out a handful of goldfish crackers from the snack container. 7 goldfish plus 6 more. Count them out. Emma's face brightened as she carefully arranged the crackers in 2 groups, her pink tongue poking out slightly in concentration, a habit that reminded Mark so acutely of Sarah that his chest sometimes tightened with the familiar ache of loss. 3 years had passed since cancer had stolen his wife, yet moments like these still caught him off guard, the resemblance between mother and daughter so striking it felt like glimpsing a ghost. 13, Emma announced triumphantly, then immediately popped 2 goldfish into her mouth as a reward for her mathematical victory. "Excellent. Now let's pack up your backpack before bed," Mark said, beginning to gather the scattered homework papers. As he reached for Emma's purple unicorn backpack, a birthday gift that had required 3 separate shopping trips to find the exact shade of purple she'd envisioned, a folded piece of notebook paper fluttered to the floor. Emma lunged for it with surprising urgency, but Mark's reflexes, honed by years of catching dropped sippy cups and falling toys, were faster. "What's this, Em?" The paper felt different from her usual homework assignments, thicker, as though it had been folded and unfolded multiple times. Emma's cheeks flushed pink, and she fidgeted with the hem of her unicorn pajama top. "It's nothing, Daddy, just a note for school." Something in her tone too casual, too practiced triggered Mark's parental intuition. He unfolded the paper carefully, recognizing Emma's painstakingly neat handwriting, each letter formed with the deliberate care of a child still mastering cursive. "Your dad deserves to be happy again," the note read. Below it, in the same careful script, "Operation Make Daddy Smile. Step 1. Find someone nice. Step 2. Make them be friends. Step 3. Help Daddy not be sad anymore." Mark's breath caught in his throat as he read the words again, each line hitting him with the force of an unexpected revelation. His 8-year-old daughter had been watching him, studying him, and somewhere in her perceptive young mind, she had concluded that her father needed rescuing from his own grief. "Emma," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight that made her look up from her intensive study of the table's wood grain. "Sweetheart, what is this?" The facade of innocence crumbled immediately. Emma's lower lip trembled, and her brown eyes, Sarah's eyes, he realized with a familiar pang filled with tears that threatened to spill over. "I didn't mean for you to find it yet," she whispered. "It was supposed to be a surprise." Mark set the note down carefully and lifted Emma onto his lap, feeling the weight of her small body against his chest. At 8, she was getting too big for such comfort, but neither of them seemed ready to abandon this ritual of closeness. "Tell me about this plan, Em. What made you think Daddy needs someone nice?" Emma wiped her nose on her pajama sleeve, a habit Mark had long ago decided wasn't worth fighting. "You think I don't notice, but I do." she said with the serious tone she reserved for important conversations. "You make me breakfast and help with homework and read stories, but then when you think I'm asleep, you sit in Mommy's chair and look at her pictures and you get really, really sad." The accuracy of her observation stunned him. Mark had thought himself careful about shielding Emma from the depth of his grief, saving his most difficult moments for late evenings when she was safely asleep. Yet here was evidence that his daughter possessed an emotional intelligence that seemed impossible for someone who still needed help tying her shoes. "Sometimes grown-ups need time to feel sad," Mark explained, smoothing her hair with one hand. "It doesn't mean I'm not happy with you." "I know that," Emma said with 8-year-old exasperation. "But Mommy wouldn't want you to be sad forever. She told me once that love is supposed to make people happy, not sad all the time." Mark's throat constricted as memory flooded back. Sarah, during one of their last coherent conversations before the morphine made communication difficult, had gripped his hand with surprising strength. "Promise me you won't close your heart," she had whispered. "Emma needs to see that love is possible, even after loss. Don't let grief become your whole identity." He had promised, of course, because denying a dying woman's final request was unthinkable. But in the 3 years since her funeral, Mark had focused entirely on Emma's needs, convincing himself that being a good father meant sacrificing any personal happiness that might compete with his daughter's well-being. "Where did you get the idea for this plan?" Mark asked, curious about the sophisticated emotional reasoning behind Emma's scheme. Emma brightened, clearly relieved that the conversation had shifted from confession to explanation. "Mrs. Henderson next door said that when her husband died, she thought she'd never smile again. But then she met Mr. Peterson at the grocery store, and now they play cards every Wednesday, and she laughs really loud at his jokes." Mark knew Mrs. Henderson's story well. The 67-year-old widow had indeed found unexpected love after decades of marriage, and her Tuesday evening card games had become legendary in the neighborhood for their volume and laughter. But Mark had never considered the parallel between their situations. "And I asked Mrs. Rodriguez at school what makes people happy," Emma continued, building steam as she outlined her research. "She said having someone to share ice cream with makes everything better." "You never share ice cream anymore, Daddy. You just watch me eat it." The observation was painfully accurate. Mark realized that somewhere in his devotion to Emma's happiness, he had forgotten how to pursue his own joy. When had he last eaten dessert for pleasure rather than obligation? When had he last looked forward to anything beyond Emma's bedtime stories and weekend soccer games? "So who did you have in mind for this plan?" Mark asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Emma's face lit up with the enthusiasm of a child revealing a carefully guarded secret. "Miss Peterson. She's really pretty, and she always smells like vanilla, and she knows all the good books. And she asked me once if you were okay, because you looked tired during parent conferences." Claire Peterson. Emma's second-grade teacher, a woman Mark had interacted with primarily through scheduled conferences and permission slip signatures. He tried to recall their conversations. Polite exchanges about Emma's progress, her reading level, her social development. Had there been something more beneath those professional interactions? Had he been so focused on Emma's academic success that he'd missed other possibilities entirely? "Miss Peterson is very nice," Mark agreed carefully. "But relationships between grown-ups are complicated. You can't just decide 2 people should be together." "Why not?" Emma asked with the logical directness that often left Mark scrambling for answers. "You both like books. You both think I'm smart. You both get sad sometimes, but try to hide it. Mrs. Rodriguez says that's called compatibility." Mark struggled to maintain his composure. His daughter had apparently been conducting informal relationship counseling sessions with various adults in their community, gathering data to support her matchmaking hypothesis. The sophistication of her approach was both amusing and heartbreaking. "When did you start thinking about this?" he asked. Emma considered the question with surprising seriousness. "Remember when we went to Lily's birthday party and her parents were dancing in the kitchen while we ate cake? They were being silly and laughing, and Lily said, 'That's what love looks like.' I realized I've never seen you dance or be silly like that." The memory hit Mark with unexpected force. The birthday party had been 2 months ago, and he distinctly remembered envying the casual intimacy between Lily's parents, the way they moved around each other with practiced ease, the small touches and shared glances that spoke of deep partnership. He had dismissed his longing as inappropriate nostalgia, but apparently Emma had been studying the same scene and drawing her own conclusions. "Daddy," Emma said, her voice small and uncertain, "did I do something wrong? Are you mad at me for making the plan?" Mark hugged her tighter, overwhelmed by the complexity of emotions her revelation had triggered. Pride in her emotional intelligence, guilt that his grief had been transparent enough for her to notice, fear that his daughter felt responsible for his happiness. And underneath it all, a tiny spark of something he hadn't felt in 3 years: curiosity about possibilities beyond his carefully constructed routine of work and single parenthood. "I'm not mad, sweetheart," he assured her. "I'm just surprised that you've been thinking about such grown-up things." "I think about lots of grown-up things," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Like how you always check the locks twice before bed, and how you never play music anymore, and how you only smile with your mouth but not with your eyes, except when I do something really funny." Each observation cut deeper than the last. Mark realized that in his effort to be everything Emma needed, he had become a careful approximation of himself, functional but not fully alive. His daughter, with the clear vision of childhood, had recognized what he had been denying: that surviving was not the same as living. "What's step 4 of your plan?" Mark asked, noting that her list had stopped at step 3. Emma grinned, and for the first time in the conversation, she looked entirely like the mischievous 8-year-old she was. "I haven't figured that out yet. I was hoping steps 1, 2, and 3 would work first." Despite everything, Mark found himself laughing, not the careful, measured laughter he'd perfected for Emma's benefit, but genuine amusement at his daughter's strategic thinking. "You know what, Em? Maybe we should work on step 4 together." Emma's eyes widened with surprise and delight. "Really? You're not going to tell me I'm too young to understand?" "I think you understand more than I've been giving you credit for," Mark admitted. "But any plan involving grown-up feelings needs grown-up supervision." As he carried Emma upstairs for her bedtime routine, Mark caught sight of their reflection in the hallway mirror. Father and daughter, partners in the daily navigation of loss and healing. But perhaps, he thought, looking at Emma's note still clutched in his hand, they were ready to become partners in hope as well. The house settled into its evening quiet as Mark tucked Emma into bed, reading 2 chapters of their current book, a tale of adventure and friendship that Emma had chosen specifically because the characters help each other be brave. After she fell asleep, clutching the stuffed elephant that had been her constant companion since her mother's death, Mark found himself standing in the doorway, watching her peaceful face in the dim glow of her nightlight. 3 years ago, when Sarah's illness had progressed beyond treatment options, Mark had made countless promises. To love Emma enough for 2 parents. To keep Sarah's memory alive through stories and traditions. To be strong enough to carry them both through the impossible grief of loss. He had kept those promises with determined faithfulness, but somewhere in his dedication to being enough, he had forgotten Sarah's final request: to remain open to love. Emma's note lay on his nightstand, the careful handwriting testament to hours of planning and hoping. "Your dad deserves to be happy again." The words carried a weight that seemed impossible for someone who still needed help reaching the cereal boxes on high shelves. Mark walked to his bedroom window, looking out at the quiet street where other families were settling into their evening routines. Across the neighborhood, lights glowed in windows, where couples were sharing the small intimacies of partnership, cleaning up dinner dishes, discussing tomorrow's schedules, stealing moments of connection after children's bedtimes. He had once been part of that world, had taken for granted the simple pleasure of having someone to share the ordinary moments. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister Jennifer, a weekly check-in that had become routine since Sarah's death. "How are you and Em doing? Miss you both." Usually, Mark responded with generic positivity. "We're good. Em's doing great in school. Tonight, looking at Emma's note, he found himself typing something different. "Em's growing up so fast? Sometimes I think she sees things more clearly than I do." Jennifer's response came quickly. "Kids have a way of cutting through our adult complications. What's she seeing?" Mark stared at the question, considering how to explain the evening's revelation. His sister had been gently encouraging him to consider dating for the past year, suggestions he had deflected with reminders about Emma's needs and his own lack of readiness. But Emma's note suggested that his readiness might be less relevant than his daughter's perspective on what their family needed. "She thinks I should be open to finding love again," he typed, then immediately deleted it. Instead, he wrote, "She's just very perceptive about emotions. We had an interesting conversation tonight." "Good. You deserve happiness, Mark. Both of you do." After ending the conversation, Mark sat on the edge of his bed, holding Emma's note and thinking about Claire Peterson. In their brief interactions, he had noticed her warmth with Emma, her patience during difficult behavioral moments, the way she seemed to genuinely care about each child's individual progress. But he had carefully maintained professional boundaries, partly from appropriate caution and partly from his own emotional unavailability. Now, examining those memories through the lens of Emma's observations, Mark realized there had been moments, subtle ones, that suggested Claire's interest extended beyond her professional obligations. The way she always asked specifically about Emma's emotional adjustment after particularly difficult days, her suggestion that Mark might benefit from joining the parent reading committee, the extra time she had taken during their last conference, discussing not just Emma's academic progress, but her social development and emotional needs. Mark pulled out his laptop and opened Emma's school portal, ostensibly to check her upcoming assignments, but actually to look at Claire's faculty photo. The professional headshot showed a woman in her early 30s with shoulder-length auburn hair and green eyes that seemed to sparkle even in the formal photograph. She looked approachable and intelligent, and Mark found himself wondering about her life outside the classroom. Was she married? Did she have children of her own? What made her laugh? What did she do on weekends? The questions surprised him with their intensity. For 3 years, his curiosity about other people had been limited to their potential impact on Emma's well-being. When had he last wondered about someone's inner life, simply because he found them interesting? Emma's note had accomplished something that years of well-meaning advice from family and friends had failed to achieve. It had forced Mark to confront the difference between existing for Emma's sake and living in a way that would truly benefit them both. His daughter needed to see that love was possible after loss, that happiness could coexist with memory, that moving forward didn't mean leaving behind the people they had loved. As Mark prepared for bed, following the routine that had become automatic, checking Emma's room one final time, ensuring doors were locked, setting tomorrow's alarm, he found himself thinking about step 4 of Emma's plan. What would it look like to actively pursue connection rather than simply maintaining the status quo? How did one begin again after years of careful emotional self-protection? The rain had stopped, leaving the neighborhood quiet except for the occasional passing car. Mark lay in bed, staring at the ceiling where shadows from streetlights created shifting patterns. In the drawer of his nightstand lay a photo of Sarah, one of dozens throughout the house that chronicled their life together. For the first time in 3 years, he found himself imagining a future that might include new photos, new memories, new love that honored rather than replaced what had come before. Emma's voice drifted from her room. She sometimes talked in her sleep, working through the complexities of her 8-year-old world through unconscious narrative. Tonight, Mark caught fragments about helping and happiness and making families complete. Even in sleep, it seemed, his daughter was orchestrating hope. Mark smiled in the darkness, recognizing that tomorrow would bring new questions and challenges. How did one begin to date as a widowed father? How did he balance Emma's enthusiasm with appropriate caution? How did he honor Sarah's memory while remaining open to future love? But, for the first time since his wife's death, the questions felt like possibilities rather than obstacles. As sleep finally claimed him, Mark's last conscious thought was of Emma's note, tucked safely in his nightstand drawer. "Your dad deserves to be happy again. Perhaps, he thought, it was time to believe her. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital had burned themselves into Mark Sullivan's memory with the permanence of trauma. 3 years later, he could still recall the exact pattern of ceiling tiles above Sarah's bed, the antiseptic smell that seemed to cling to his clothes for days afterward, and the sound of machines that had measured his wife's final breaths with clinical precision. The oncologist's words still echoed in quiet moments. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sullivan. There's nothing more we can do." Sarah Elizabeth Sullivan had died on a Tuesday morning in October, when the maple trees outside their bedroom window were just beginning to turn the brilliant gold she had always loved. She had been 31 years old, a kindergarten teacher with a laugh that could fill any room, and a woman who had approached even terminal cancer with the same methodical optimism she brought to lesson planning. Her final words to Mark, whispered through morphine-dulled lips, had been about Emma. "Promise me you'll help her remember the love, not the loss." The funeral had passed in a blur of casseroles, condolences, and Emma's small hand clutched in his throughout the service. 5-year-old Emma had worn the navy blue dress Sarah had specifically chosen, standing beside Mark with a composure that seemed impossible for someone who still believed in tooth fairies. She had asked only one question during the entire ceremony. "When will Mommy come home?" Mark's answer that Mommy was staying in heaven had been accepted with the matter-of-fact trust that children reserve for their parents' explanations of incomprehensible truths. The first year had been survival in its most basic form. Mark had taken family leave from his position as a software engineer at a mid-sized tech company, using Sarah's life insurance money to cover their expenses while he navigated the impossible logistics of single parenthood. Every task that had once been shared now fell to him alone. Grocery shopping with a grieving kindergartner in tow, learning to braid hair through YouTube tutorials, deciphering the complex social dynamics of elementary school friendships. The mornings had been the hardest. Sarah had been an early riser, filling their kitchen with the sounds of breakfast preparation and NPR news before Emma awakened. In her absence, Mark had struggled to create new routines that didn't echo with her missing presence. He had learned to make pancakes shaped like butterflies, Emma's favorite though. His attempts never quite matched Sarah's artistic flair. He had mastered the art of choosing weather-appropriate clothing for a child who changed her mind about outfits with startling frequency. Most importantly, he had become fluent in the delicate balance of acknowledging Emma's grief while maintaining the stability she desperately needed. Those early months had revealed Emma's remarkable resilience and equally remarkable perceptiveness. She had begun taking care of herself in small ways that broke Mark's heart. Organizing her own backpack the night before school, remembering to brush her teeth without reminders, comforting her father when his tears came unexpectedly during bedtime stories. At 5, she had possessed an emotional intelligence that seemed impossible, reading Mark's moods with uncanny accuracy and adjusting her own behavior accordingly. "Daddy, are you having a sad day?" she would ask when Mark's movements became too careful, too controlled. On those days, she would suggest activities that required his full attention: board games, art projects, elaborate tea parties with her stuffed animals, anything that might distract him from the weight of his grief. By Emma's 6th birthday, Mark had returned to work, grateful for the structured distraction of coding problems and project deadlines. His colleagues had been understanding about his need for flexibility, allowing him to work modified hours that accommodated school pickups and pediatric appointments. The transition back to professional life had been jarring. His office had remained exactly as he'd left it, complete with the framed photo of Sarah and Emma from their last family vacation. For weeks, he had found himself reaching for his phone to call Sarah during lunch breaks, forgetting in the midst of debugging sessions that she would never answer again. Emma had started first grade that fall, and Mark had approached the milestone with the obsessive preparation of a military campaign. He had researched her teacher extensively, volunteered for every classroom activity, and positioned himself as the most involved parent in the grade, partly from genuine interest in Emma's education and partly from his need to control every variable in his daughter's life. If he could anticipate every challenge, prepare for every possibility, perhaps he could shield Emma from further loss. The routine they had established during that second year had become sacred. 6. 6:30 a.m. wake-up, with Emma climbing into his bed for 10 minutes of snuggling before starting the day. Breakfast together at the kitchen table, with Emma chattering about her dreams while Mark packed her lunch with the precision of a sous chef. The drive to school filled with Emma's questions about everything from cloud formations to why some people had different colored skin. After school pickup at exactly 3:15, followed by homework at the kitchen table, dinner prepared together, bath time, and the elaborate bedtime routine that had expanded to include stories, songs, prayers, and increasingly philosophical conversations about life, death, and everything in between. Mark had thrown himself into fatherhood with the intensity of someone trying to fill a space designed for two people. He had learned to French braid hair by practicing on Emma's dolls. He had become an expert on age-appropriate movies, children's literature, and the intricate social hierarchies of elementary school friendships. He could discuss the relative merits of different brands of children's vitamins, explain the phases of the moon using kitchen implements, and navigate the complex emotions of a child processing grief through play therapy. But somewhere in his dedication to being everything Emma needed, Mark had forgotten how to be anything for himself. His own grief had been carefully compartmentalized, allowed expression only during late-night hours when Emma was safely asleep. He would sit in Sarah's reading chair by the living room window that still held the faint scent of her lavender lotion and allow himself to remember. Sometimes he would look through photo albums, tracing the progression of their relationship from college sweethearts to new parents to the family of three they had been for too brief a time. Other nights, he would simply sit in the darkness, overwhelmed by the magnitude of loneliness that no amount of parental responsibility could fill. His social life had evaporated with surprising completeness. Married friends, well-meaning but uncertain how to include a widowed father in their couple-focused gatherings, had gradually stopped calling. Single friends seemed uncomfortable with the intensity of his parental responsibilities and his complete unavailability for spontaneous plans. Mark had told himself that Emma needed his full attention, that maintaining adult friendships was a luxury they couldn't afford while she was still processing her mother's death. The truth, which Mark had been reluctant to acknowledge even to himself, was that maintaining connections with other adults required a level of emotional energy he simply didn't possess. Every conversation outside of work and parenting demanded explanations. How he was doing, how Emma was adjusting, whether he was getting back out there yet. The questions, though kindly meant, felt like intrusions into a carefully maintained emotional equilibrium. It was easier to focus entirely on Emma's needs than to navigate the complex social expectations of adult grief. By Emma's 7th birthday, their routine had achieved the smooth efficiency of a well-rehearsed performance. Mark had learned to anticipate Emma's needs before she voiced them, to read the subtle signs that indicated approaching meltdowns or emotional overwhelm. He could pack a perfect school lunch in under 5 minutes, help with homework while simultaneously preparing dinner, and transition seamlessly from professional conference calls to tea parties with stuffed animals. But the very efficiency of their routine had become a form of emotional protection. As long as every moment was scheduled, every need anticipated, there was no space for the kind of spontaneous joy that might remind him of what they had lost. Mark had become a master of careful happiness, celebrating Emma's achievements, enjoying her laughter, taking pride in her growth, while maintaining the emotional distance necessary to function. The parent-teacher conferences had become Mark's primary connection to the adult world beyond his workplace. Emma's teachers, year after year, had praised her academic performance and social adjustment while noting her unusual maturity. "She has an old soul," was a common observation, and Mark always nodded in agreement while privately wondering if Emma's premature wisdom was a sign of successful adaptation or evidence that his daughter had been forced to grow up too quickly. Claire Peterson had been Emma's second-grade teacher for 2 months when Mark attended his first conference of the school year. He had arrived precisely on time, armed with a list of questions about Emma's reading level and social integration. Claire had greeted him with the professional warmth he had come to expect from elementary school teachers, but something in her manner had been different, more personal, more engaged than the efficient pleasantries he was accustomed to. "Emma is remarkable," Claire had begun, settling into her chair across from Mark at the small conference table. "Her reading comprehension is well above grade level, and she has an intuitive understanding of mathematics that's quite rare for her age." Mark had nodded, accustomed to hearing about Emma's academic gifts. Since Sarah's death, Emma had approached learning with an intensity that sometimes worried him, though knowledge might provide protection against future uncertainty. "But I'm also noticing some things that concern me," Claire had continued, her green eyes meeting his with unexpected directness. "Emma takes care of other children in ways that seem beyond her years. When someone is upset, she immediately becomes the caretaker. She's extremely aware of adult emotions and seems to feel responsible for managing them." The observation had hit Mark with uncomfortable accuracy. He had noticed Emma's tendency to comfort her classmates, her quick responses to his own emotional shifts, her careful attention to his moods and needs. He had told himself it was simply Emma's naturally nurturing personality, inherited from Sarah's generous spirit. "She's always been empathetic," Mark had replied carefully. "Even before her mother's death, she was sensitive to other people's feelings." Claire had studied him for a moment before responding. "Mr. Sullivan, may I ask how you're doing? I know this has been an enormous adjustment for both of you." The question had caught Mark off guard. In 3 years of parent-teacher conferences, no educator had ever inquired about his own well-being. He had given his standard response, "We're managing well. Emma's adjustment has been remarkable." "That's not what I asked," Claire had said gently. "I asked how you're doing." For a moment, Mark had felt the careful walls he had constructed around his grief begin to tremble. The simple act of being seen, of having someone notice that he might be struggling beneath his competent single-father exterior, had threatened to overwhelm him with unexpected emotion. "I'm focused on Emma's needs right now," he had managed. "Everything else is secondary." Claire had nodded, but her expression had suggested she understood more than his careful words revealed. "Emma is lucky to have such a dedicated father." But children are incredibly perceptive about their parents' emotional states. Sometimes, our attempts to protect them from our own pain actually communicate that their feelings are too dangerous to express. The insight had stayed with Mark long after the conference ended. He had driven home thinking about Claire's words, wondering if his careful emotional control was actually teaching Emma that grief was something to be hidden rather than processed. That night, he had watched Emma more carefully during their bedtime routine, noticing the way she monitored his expressions, the careful attention she paid to his tone of voice, the way she seemed to adjust her own emotions in response to his. The second conference, in January, had followed a similar pattern. Claire had praised Emma's continued academic progress, while gently probing the emotional dynamics she observed in the classroom. "Emma often asks if she can help with tasks that are really my responsibility," she had explained. "Yesterday she spent her recess time organizing the book corner because she noticed I looked tired. It's sweet, but it suggests she feels responsible for taking care of the adults in her life." Mark had left that conference with a growing awareness that his dedication to Emma's well-being might be inadvertently teaching her that she was responsible for his happiness. The realization had been painful, the possibility that his grief, carefully hidden though it was, might be shaping Emma's understanding of her role in the world. Spring had brought subtle changes to their routine. Mark had begun to notice Claire's presence more deliberately during school pickups, finding himself lingering in conversations about Emma's progress or upcoming classroom events. She had a way of asking about Emma that suggested genuine interest rather than professional obligation, and her insights into child development often helped Mark navigate difficult parenting moments. "Emma mentioned that you've been reading Charlotte's Web together," Claire had said during one pickup conversation. "How is she handling the themes about death and friendship?" The question had led to a 15-minute discussion about helping children process loss through literature, during which Mark had found himself sharing more than he had intended about Emma's ongoing adjustment. Claire had listened with the kind of focused attention that suggested she was truly interested rather than simply being polite. "You're doing an incredible job with her," Claire had said as other parents arrived for pickup. "Single parenting is one of the hardest things anyone can do, and Emma's resilience is a testament to the stability you've provided." The praise had meant more to Mark than he had expected. For 3 years, he had second-guessed nearly every parenting decision, wondering constantly whether he was providing enough emotional support, intellectual stimulation, and social opportunities. Claire's professional validation had felt like a lifeline he hadn't realized he needed. By the end of Emma's second-grade year, Mark had developed a grudging respect for Claire's insights into his daughter's emotional world. She had noticed patterns that he had missed, understood behaviors that had puzzled him, and offered suggestions that had genuinely improved Emma's school experience. More than that, she had seen Emma as a complete person rather than simply a student, understanding her gifts, her challenges, and the unique perspective she brought to every situation. The final conference of the year had taken place on a warm afternoon in late May. Emma had been playing on the playground while Mark and Claire reviewed her academic portfolio, discussing her readiness for 3rd grade and plans for summer enrichment. "I want to say something that might be outside my professional boundaries," Claire had said as they concluded the formal portion of their meeting. "Emma is an extraordinary child, but she's carrying emotional weight that seems too heavy for someone her age. She talks about taking care of you, about making sure you're not sad, about being good so you won't have more worries." Mark had felt his chest tighten with familiar guilt. "I've tried to shield her from my grief. I thought I was protecting her." "I think you've done a remarkable job of providing stability and love," Claire had replied. "But Emma needs to see that adults can handle difficult emotions without children needing to fix them. She needs permission to be 8 years old rather than your emotional caretaker." The conversation had continued for another 20 minutes, with Claire sharing observations about Emma's behavior patterns and offering suggestions for helping her develop age-appropriate boundaries around emotional responsibility. Mark had left feeling both grateful for Claire's insights and overwhelmed by the realization that his careful emotional control might be having unintended consequences. That evening, as he had helped Emma with her nightly routine, Mark had found himself studying his daughter with new awareness. How often did she check his facial expressions for signs of sadness? How frequently did she offer comfort or distraction when she sensed his mood shifting? When had his grief become her responsibility to manage? The summer had passed quietly, with Mark making conscious efforts to model emotional honesty for Emma. When he felt sad about missing Sarah, he began acknowledging his feelings rather than hiding them. "I'm thinking about Mommy today, and that makes me feel sad," he would say. "But sad feelings are normal and okay. They don't mean anything is wrong." To his surprise, Emma had responded to his emotional transparency with visible relief. She had begun expressing her own feelings more freely, talking about missing her mother without the careful concern for Mark's reaction that had characterized her previous grief expressions. As Emma's 3rd grade year approached, Mark had realized that Claire Peterson had given him something he hadn't known he needed: perspective on his own parenting, and permission to acknowledge that being a good father didn't require perfect emotional control. Her insights had helped him understand that Emma's remarkable maturity was both a gift and a potential burden, that his daughter's wisdom needed to be balanced with age-appropriate innocence. The routine they had maintained for 3 years continued, but with subtle shifts that allowed for more spontaneity and emotional honesty. Mark still managed every detail of Emma's daily life with careful attention, still prioritized her needs above his own, still struggled with the loneliness that no amount of parental devotion could completely fill. But Claire's observations had planted seeds of awareness that would eventually grow into Emma's own recognition that her father deserved happiness beyond their careful, controlled routine. On the night Mark discovered Emma's note, he had thought back to all of Claire's gentle observations about Emma's emotional perceptiveness and premature caretaking tendencies. His daughter had been watching him for 3 years, studying his grief with the careful attention of someone who felt responsible for his happiness. The note wasn't just a child's matchmaking scheme, it was evidence that Emma had internalized the very concern Claire had identified, the sense that adult emotions were her responsibility to manage. But perhaps, Mark had realized as he tucked Emma into bed that night, his daughter's plan wasn't about taking care of him at all. Perhaps it was about giving them both permission to hope for a future that included joy as well as memory, love as well as loss. Claire Peterson had helped him understand Emma's emotional world. Now Emma was offering to help him navigate his own. The morning after discovering Emma's note, Mark found himself paying closer attention to his daughter's behavior with the heightened awareness of a parent who had suddenly realized they'd been missing crucial details. As Emma sat at the breakfast table, methodically eating her cereal, while simultaneously organizing her school supplies with mathematical precision, Mark noticed the small notebook she kept beside her homework folder, a sparkly purple journal he'd assumed was for creative writing assignments. "What's in the special notebook, Em?" he asked casually, buttering toast while stealing glances at her concentrated expression. Emma's spoon paused halfway to her mouth, and she glanced up with the carefully neutral expression she wore when calculating how much truth to reveal. "Just ideas for school projects and stuff," she replied, closing the notebook with deliberate nonchalance. "Nothing important." The response triggered Mark's parental intuition, the same instinct that had learned to detect fever before symptoms appeared and sense playground drama before tears began. Emma's "nothing important" tone was identical to the one she'd used when hiding the note about Operation Make Daddy Smile. After dropping Emma at school, Mark found himself driving more slowly than usual, thinking about Claire Peterson's morning routine. Did she arrive early to prepare her classroom? Did she drink coffee in the faculty lounge? Had she noticed his slightly longer glances during their recent conversations? The questions surprised him with their specificity. When had he begun wondering about Claire's daily habits? Emma, meanwhile, was conducting her own reconnaissance mission during morning math time. She had positioned herself strategically near the classroom door, ostensibly working on multiplication tables while actually monitoring the hallway for Ms. Peterson's interactions with other parents. Her best friend Sophia Martinez sat beside her, serving as both accomplice and lookout for this phase of what Emma had privately dubbed Project Happiness. "She smiled really big when your dad dropped you off yesterday," Sophia whispered, pointing her pencil toward a particularly challenging math problem while actually discussing their surveillance findings. "And she asked me how you were feeling about the book fair like 3 different times." Emma nodded thoughtfully, adding this intelligence to her growing understanding of adult behavior patterns. In the past 2 weeks, since first formulating her plan, she had become an expert observer of subtle social cues. She had noticed that Miss Peterson always straightened her hair when Mark appeared for pickup, that her voice became slightly higher when she spoke to him compared to other parents, that she found reasons to discuss Emma's progress even when there was nothing particularly noteworthy to report. Most importantly, Emma had observed her father's transformation during their brief conversations with Ms. Peterson. The careful tension he carried in his shoulders would relax. His professional parent conference voice would soften into something more natural. He would smile, not the deliberate, measured smile he used for Emma's benefit, but genuine expressions of amusement or interest. These observations had convinced Emma that her instincts were correct. Her father and her teacher possessed what her research with Mrs. Rodriguez had identified as romantic compatibility. During lunch recess, Emma and Sophia convened their daily strategy meeting at the far end of the playground, using the cover of the monkey bars to discuss their increasingly sophisticated schemes. Sophia's mother, Dr. Elena Martinez, was a pediatric psychiatrist who had been widowed 2 years earlier and had become Emma's unofficial consultant on matters of adult emotional complexity. "My mom says that grown-ups need excuses to spend time together because they're too scared to ask directly," Sophia reported, hanging upside down from the bars while delivering this crucial intelligence. "She says they have to pretend it's about something else, like work or their kids." Emma considered this insight while attempting her own inverted monkey bar position. The playground equipment provided an excellent thinking environment. The physical challenge of hanging upside down seemed to stimulate creative problem-solving. "So we need to give them more reasons to talk about me," she concluded. "Like official school reasons." "Exactly." Sophia flipped right side up with 8-year-old agility. "My mom also said that when adults are falling in love, they find excuses to be helpful to each other. So maybe your dad could help Miss Peterson with something teachery." The conversation was interrupted by the recess bell, but Emma spent the remainder of the afternoon developing what she privately considered her most brilliant scheme yet. Operation Forgotten Lunchbox. The plan was elegantly simple. If she accidentally left her lunchbox in the classroom, her father would need to retrieve it after school, creating an opportunity for extended conversation with Miss Peterson without the usual crowd of parents and children. That evening, as Mark helped Emma organize her backpack for the following day, she carefully positioned her lunchbox behind her desk chair where she could easily forget it the next morning. The deception required precise timing. She needed to remember to forget at exactly the right moment, after her father had already left for work but before boarding the school bus. "All set for tomorrow?" Mark asked, checking Emma's homework folder with his customary thoroughness. "Yep. Math worksheet finished, reading log completed, and I remembered to pack my library book," Emma replied, mentally rehearsing the sequence of events that would hopefully result in her lunchbox remaining behind when she left for school. The following morning proceeded according to Emma's carefully orchestrated plan. She ate breakfast, gathered her backpack, kissed her father goodbye, and boarded the school bus while successfully leaving her lunchbox beside her bedroom desk. The oversight was discovered during snack time when she opened her backpack to find only homework folders and school supplies. "Oh no!" Emma exclaimed with perfectly calibrated dismay, loud enough for Miss Peterson to hear from her position near the reading corner. "I forgot my lunchbox at home." Claire Peterson approached with the concerned expression Emma had anticipated. "Don't worry, sweetheart. We can call your father and ask him to bring it by during lunchtime." Emma's face brightened with what appeared to be relief, but was actually satisfaction at her plan's success. "That would be great. Dad always worries when I don't eat my whole lunch." The phone call reached Mark during his mid-morning coffee break, and he found himself oddly pleased by the excuse to visit Emma's school during the day. He had driven past the building countless times, but rarely had reason to enter during school hours, when the hallways buzzed with the energy of active learning rather than the quieter atmosphere of pickup time. Emma's lunchbox sat on his kitchen counter, where she had strategically positioned it too obvious to have been genuinely forgotten, though Mark remained oblivious to the careful staging involved. He grabbed the insulated bag decorated with unicorns and rainbows, a purchase from the previous year that Emma had chosen, specifically because it made her father smile when he packed her daily sandwich and apple slices. Arriving at the school during lunch period, Mark navigated the familiar corridors toward Emma's classroom, passing bulletin boards displaying student artwork and announcements for upcoming events. The building smelled of cafeteria, food, and floor cleaner, institutional scents that triggered memories of his own elementary school experience and pride in Emma's academic achievements. Claire Peterson was organizing math manipulatives when Mark appeared in her classroom doorway, holding Emma's lunchbox with what might have been mild embarrassment at his daughter's forgetfulness. "Thank you so much for bringing this," Claire said, approaching with a smile that seemed brighter than strictly necessary for such a routine interaction. Emma was quite worried about missing her lunch. "She's very particular about her routine," Mark replied, noting how Claire's presence seemed to transform the sterile classroom environment into something warmer and more inviting. "I think she inherited my tendency toward organization." Claire laughed, a sound that carried genuine amusement rather than polite acknowledgement. "Emma definitely has strong opinions about structure and planning. Yesterday, she reorganized our classroom library by reading level and color coordination. I didn't have the heart to tell her that our previous system was actually less efficient." The conversation continued for several minutes, flowing naturally from Emma's organizational tendencies to her academic progress to Mark's observations about her social development. Mark found himself lingering, despite his awareness that he should return to work, enjoying the rare opportunity for unhurried adult conversation that didn't revolve around schedules or logistics. "I hope Emma's not developing anxiety about forgetting things," Mark said, though the concern felt more like an excuse to extend their interaction than genuine worry. "She's been very focused on being prepared lately." "Actually, I think it's healthy," Claire replied, leaning against her desk with the relaxed posture of someone comfortable with extended conversation. "Children her age are developing independence, and taking responsibility for their belongings is part of that growth. Besides, forgetting lunchboxes is practically a childhood rite of passage." Mark smiled at her reassurance, recognizing the professional expertise behind her casual observation. "You must see every possible childhood behavior pattern in your classroom. It keeps things interesting," Claire agreed. "Every child brings such unique perspectives and challenges. Emma, for instance, has this remarkable ability to notice when her classmates are struggling and offer exactly the right kind of help. She's going to be an extraordinary leader someday." The praise warmed Mark in ways that extended beyond parental pride. Claire's appreciation for Emma's character seemed to reflect understanding of the values he had tried to instill, validation that his parenting efforts were producing positive results. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Emma's class returning from lunch recess, a parade of 8-year-olds chattering about playground adventures and afternoon activities. Emma spotted her father immediately, her face lighting up with what appeared to be surprise but was actually triumph at her plan's success. "Dad, you brought my lunchbox," she exclaimed, accepting the unicorn-decorated bag with appropriate gratitude. "Thank you so much." Mark kissed the top of her head, inhaling the familiar scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. "Next time, double-check your backpack before leaving home, okay?" "I will," Emma promised solemnly, already planning her next strategic oversight. As Mark prepared to leave, Claire walked him toward the classroom door, a gesture that seemed both professional and personal. "Thank you again for bringing her lunch. Emma's lucky to have such a responsive father." "She makes it easy," Mark replied, though the simple exchange felt weighted with meanings he couldn't quite identify. That evening, Emma peppered her father with questions about his school visit while they prepared dinner together, a routine that had become one of their most cherished daily rituals. "Did you talk to Miss Peterson for a long time?" she asked with carefully casual interest while setting the table with their mismatched but beloved dinnerware. "A few minutes," Mark replied, stirring pasta sauce while mentally replaying the conversation's highlights. "She had nice things to say about your helpfulness in class." Emma beamed with pride that was only partially related to the academic praise. "She's really smart about kid stuff. And she always smells like vanilla, and reads the best voices for story time." The observation struck Mark as oddly specific, detailed in ways that suggested Emma had given considerable thought to Ms. Peterson's qualities. "She does seem very dedicated to her students." He agreed, wondering when he had begun noticing Claire's professional dedication as personally appealing rather than simply reassuring. Over the following weeks, Emma's strategic campaign continued with increasingly sophisticated variations on her initial success. She developed a rotation of forgotten items: library books that required after-school retrieval, permission slips that needed immediate signatures, art projects too delicate for backpack transport. Each incident created opportunities for Mark and Claire to interact beyond their usual brief exchanges during pickup and drop-off times. Sofia Martinez proved an invaluable ally in these endeavors, providing both moral support and practical assistance. During one particularly creative phase, the girls convinced Sofia's mother to schedule a playdate that would require extended coordination between their families, a plan that resulted in Mark and Dr. Martinez becoming friends, and Elena offering professional insights into Emma's emotional development. "Emma's shown remarkable resilience," Elena told Mark during one of their coffee conversations while the girls played in Sofia's backyard. "But I've noticed she takes on emotional caretaking responsibilities that seem advanced for her age. Has she always been so aware of adult feelings?" The observation echoed Claire's previous comments about Emma's maturity, reinforcing Mark's growing awareness that his daughter's wisdom carried both gifts and burdens. These conversations with other parents provided perspectives on Emma's development that he couldn't achieve alone, highlighting the value of community connections he had been avoiding since Sarah's death. Emma's most ambitious scheme emerged during October, when she learned about the upcoming parent-teacher conferences scheduled for individual 20-minute appointments. Rather than settling for their assigned slot, Emma developed what she privately called the double booking strategy, a plan to create confusion that would result in extended time for her father and teacher to resolve scheduling conflicts. The operation required precise timing and coordination with Sophia, who served as both informant and alibi. Emma carefully observed Ms. Peterson's conference schedule, noting which parents had appointments immediately before and after their assigned time slot. She then claimed to have misheard their appointment time, arriving 30 minutes early and innocently insisting that her father expected to meet at the earlier slot. "I'm so sorry," Claire said, when Mark arrived for their actual appointment time to find the classroom occupied by another family. "There seems to have been some confusion about scheduling. Would you mind waiting a few minutes while I finish this conference?" Mark settled into the small plastic chair outside Emma's classroom, using the unexpected delay to observe the school's evening atmosphere. The hallways bustled with families navigating similar conferences, children displaying artwork to proud parents, while teachers facilitated discussions about academic progress and social development. When their turn finally arrived, the combination of scheduling confusion and accumulated conversation topics resulted in a 40-minute discussion that covered Emma's academic achievements, social relationships, emotional development, and future educational planning. The extended time allowed for deeper exploration of topics that usually received only surface attention during standard conferences. "Emma mentioned that you've been reading Anne of Green Gables together," Claire said toward the end of their meeting. "How is she responding to the themes about belonging and family?" The question prompted Mark to share insights into Emma's ongoing processing of loss and identity formation, conversations that had evolved significantly since Claire's previous observations about emotional caretaking. He found himself describing not just Emma's responses to literature, but his own parenting philosophy, his concerns about balancing protection with independence, and his efforts to help Emma develop age-appropriate emotional boundaries. "You're approaching these challenges with remarkable thoughtfulness," Claire responded, her professional admiration clearly extending into personal respect. Emma's fortunate to have a father who's so attentive to her emotional needs while encouraging her intellectual growth. The praise felt different from previous compliments about his parenting-less professional assessment and more personal appreciation. Mark left the conference with a sense of connection that extended beyond their shared concern for Emma's welfare, though he remained unaware of the careful orchestration that had created the opportunity for extended conversation. Emma's satisfaction with the evening's success was evident in her unusually cheerful demeanor during their drive home and bedtime routine. She had monitored the conference duration from her position in the school library, timing their emergence with stopwatch precision and interpreting her father's relaxed expression as evidence of positive interaction. "How was the conference?" she asked, with innocent curiosity, while Mark tucked her into bed. "Very good," Mark replied, smoothing her blanket with unconscious tenderness. "Ms. Peterson thinks you're doing excellent work this year." "Did you talk about other stuff too?" Emma pressed, fishing for details about non-academic conversation topics. Mark considered the question, recognizing that their discussion had indeed covered territory beyond Emma's schoolwork. "We talked about books and teaching methods, and how different children learn," he said, unknowingly confirming Emma's hopes for personal connection between the adults. As autumn progressed into early winter, Emma's schemes became increasingly sophisticated, incorporating seasonal opportunities and special events into her matchmaking strategy. She volunteered her father for classroom reading sessions during Literacy Week, ensuring that Mark would spend extended time in Claire's professional environment. She developed mysterious stomach aches that required parental pickup during Claire's lunch break, creating opportunities for private conversation without other parents present. The stomachache strategy proved particularly effective because it demonstrated Mark's attentiveness as a parent while positioning Claire as a caring educator who went beyond professional requirements to ensure Emma's welfare. During one such incident, Emma's performance was so convincing that both adults focused entirely on her comfort and medical needs, allowing natural rapport to develop without the self-consciousness that might have accompanied obviously social interaction. "She seems much better now," Claire observed as Emma's mysterious ailment resolved with remarkable speed once her father arrived. Sometimes children develop physical symptoms when they're processing emotional stress. "Has anything changed in your routine lately?" The question prompted Mark to share details about their family life that he typically kept private. Emma's ongoing adjustment to their modified holiday traditions, her occasional anxiety about his own health and safety, and the delicate balance of honoring Sarah's memory while building new traditions. Claire listened with the engaged attention of someone genuinely interested rather than professionally obligated, offering insights that helped Mark understand Emma's behavior patterns in new ways. These conversations, orchestrated by Emma's careful planning but developing according to their own natural rhythms, began to establish emotional intimacy that neither adult fully recognized. Mark found himself looking forward to school events and parent communications, while Claire discovered reasons to initiate contact about Emma's progress that went beyond standard teacher-parent protocols. Emma monitored these developments with the satisfaction of a successful strategist, documenting progress in her sparkly purple notebook and adjusting her plans based on observed results. Her alliance with Sophia provided crucial intelligence about Claire's responses to their encounters, while Dr. Martinez offered adult perspective on the emotional dynamics Emma was attempting to facilitate. "Your plan is working," Sophia reported during one of their playground strategy sessions. "My mom says Miss Peterson asks about your dad during teacher meetings, like whether he's dating anyone or how he's handling single parenthood." Emma received this intelligence with triumph tempered by 8-year-old impatience. Adult romance, she was learning, proceeded much more slowly than children's friendships. Where she and Sophia had become best friends within a single recess period, her father and teacher seemed to require weeks of careful interaction before acknowledging their mutual interest. "Maybe they need bigger reasons to spend time together," Emma mused, hanging from the monkey bars while contemplating her next strategic move. "Like helping each other with important stuff instead of just talking about me." This insight led to Emma's most ambitious scheme yet, Operation Winter Festival. The school's December celebration required extensive parent-volunteer coordination, and Emma positioned herself as the link between her father's organizational skills and Ms. Peterson's need for reliable assistance. Through careful manipulation of sign-up sheets and strategic conversations with both adults, she managed to ensure their joint responsibility for several major festival components. The resulting collaboration required multiple planning meetings, shared preparation tasks, and coordinated event management, all providing opportunities for extended interaction while maintaining the fiction that their connection was entirely practical rather than personal. Emma observed these developments with growing confidence that her plan was approaching successful completion, though she remained unaware of the subtle emotional shifts occurring beyond her direct observation. Mark began arriving early for school events, ostensibly to help with setup but actually hoping for conversation with Claire before other parents arrived. Claire found herself saving creative or challenging tasks for Mark's assistance, appreciating his thoughtful approach to problem-solving and his genuine interest in creating positive experiences for all students rather than just his own daughter. By December, Emma's matchmaking efforts had achieved success that exceeded her original expectations. Her father smiled more frequently and with greater authenticity. He spent additional time on his appearance before school events. He asked questions about Emma's teacher that went beyond academic concerns. Most significantly, he had begun to demonstrate the kind of unconscious happiness that Emma remembered from her early childhood, when her parents' love had created an atmosphere of joy that even a small child could recognize. The transformation was exactly what Emma had envisioned when she first wrote her note about helping her father find happiness again. Through careful observation, strategic planning, and innocent manipulation, She had created opportunities for two adults to discover their mutual compatibility while maintaining the fiction that their connection was entirely coincidental. As the winter festival approached, Emma prepared for what she anticipated would be the culmination of her efforts, an event that would finally force her father and teacher to acknowledge the feelings that everyone except themselves could clearly observe. Her sparkly purple notebook contained detailed plans for the evening's logistics, but more importantly, it held a child's hopes for her family's future happiness. Mark remained unaware of the careful orchestration behind his growing feelings for Claire Peterson, attributing their increasing closeness to natural compatibility and shared concern for Emma's welfare. He had no idea that his 8-year-old daughter had been expertly manipulating circumstances to create every meaningful interaction they had shared, or that Emma was already planning the final phases of her campaign to ensure that their family's future would include the love she believed they all deserved. The November morning had dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of brilliant sunshine that made Emma bounce with extra energy during breakfast. She had chattered continuously about the day's planned outdoor activities, recess games with Sophia, a nature walk to collect leaves for their science project, and the upcoming Thanksgiving play rehearsals that had the entire second grade buzzing with excitement. "Remember to wear your jacket during recess," Mark reminded her as he packed her lunch, with the methodical precision that had become second nature. "The temperature's supposed to drop this afternoon." "I will, Dad," Emma replied, though her attention was already focused on the sparkly purple notebook where she had been documenting what she privately called the success indicators of her matchmaking campaign. Recent entries included, "Dad asks about Ms. Peterson's weekend plans," and "Peterson saves the good stickers for my homework papers." The evidence, in Emma's 8-year-old analysis, suggested that Phase 2 of Operation Make Daddy Smile was proceeding according to plan. Mark dropped Emma at school with their usual routine of hugs, reminders about homework folders, and promises to hear about her day during pickup. As he drove to work, he found himself thinking about the winter festival planning meeting scheduled for that evening. Another opportunity to collaborate with Claire Peterson on what had ostensibly become their shared responsibility for coordinating parent volunteers. The meetings had evolved from strictly professional discussions into comfortable conversations that often extended well beyond their official agendas, covering topics from Emma's development to teaching philosophy to their own observations about childhood in the digital age. These interactions had begun to feel like the most anticipated parts of Mark's week, though he told himself his interest was purely practical. Claire's insights into Emma's academic and social progress were invaluable, and her suggestions for supporting Emma's emotional development had proven remarkably effective. The fact that he looked forward to their conversations with an anticipation that seemed to extend beyond parental concerns was something Mark had been carefully avoiding examining too closely. At Riverside Elementary, Claire Peterson was conducting her morning routine with the efficient grace of someone who had mastered the complex choreography of elementary education. She arranged math manipulatives with one hand while reviewing the day's lesson plans, mentally preparing for the unique challenges and opportunities that each group of 8-year-olds presented. Emma Sullivan sat at her usual desk near the window, organizing her supplies with the same methodical attention to detail that characterized her father's approach to most tasks. "Good morning, Emma," Claire said, noting the child's focused concentration on what appeared to be a personal notebook rather than standard school materials. "Are you working on something special?" Emma looked up with the slightly guilty expression she wore when caught engaging in activities that weren't technically prohibited but weren't exactly part of the assigned curriculum. "Just planning stuff for after school," she replied, closing the purple notebook with deliberate casualness. Claire smiled, recognizing the careful evasion that suggested Emma was engaged in one of her increasingly sophisticated personal projects. Over the past months, she had observed Emma's remarkable capacity for strategic thinking and long-term planning qualities that were impressive in someone who still needed reminders about tying her shoes properly. The morning proceeded according to schedule. Mathematics lessons that Emma completed with ease while helping struggling classmates reading comprehension exercises that showcased her advanced vocabulary, and collaborative science activities where her natural leadership abilities emerged. Claire had learned to challenge Emma with supplementary materials, while ensuring she didn't become isolated from her peers. A delicate balance that required constant attention to social dynamics as well as academic needs. Lunch recess arrived with the typical explosion of energy that occurred when 23 8-year-olds were released onto the playground after hours of classroom structure. Emma and Sophia immediately claimed their usual territory near the monkey bars, a location that provided both entertainment and strategic observation points for monitoring playground social hierarchies. Phase 2 is working perfectly, Emma reported to Sophia, while navigating the overhead bars with practiced efficiency. Dad spent like 20 minutes talking to Ms. Peterson yesterday about the Winter Festival, and he used his happy voice the whole time. Sophia hung upside down from the bars, her dark hair creating a curtain that provided privacy for their ongoing strategic discussions. My mom says that when adults start finding excuses to spend extra time together, it means they're developing romantic feelings. She used the scientific term courtship behavior. Emma dropped from the bars to consider this intelligence with the seriousness it deserved. Dr. Martinez's professional insights had proven invaluable throughout Operation Make Daddy Smile, providing adult perspective on behaviors that might otherwise seem insignificant to 8-year-old observers. So, what's phase 3? Sophia asked, executing a flip that demonstrated the kind of physical confidence Emma had always admired. I'm still working on that, Emma admitted. Mrs. Rodriguez says that sometimes love needs a catalyst, something big that makes people realize their feelings. But I don't know how to make a catalyst happen. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the basketball court, where a group of third graders had initiated a game that was becoming increasingly competitive. Emma and Sophia moved closer to investigate, drawn by the excitement of older children engaged in athletic displays that seemed impossibly sophisticated compared to their own playground activities. We should show them our new routine, Sophia suggested, referring to the elaborate monkey bar sequence they had been perfecting over the past weeks. Maybe they'll let us play basketball with them. Emma nodded enthusiastically, always eager to demonstrate competence to children she considered more advanced. They approached the monkey bars with the confidence of experts, beginning their routine with synchronized precision that had attracted attention from other playground observers. The sequence required a complex series of swings, flips, and transfers between different sections of the equipment. Emma had mastered each component individually, but the full routine demanded coordination and timing that pushed the limits of her physical abilities. As she reached the transition point between the parallel bars and the overhead rings, her momentum carried her slightly beyond the optimal position for the next grip. For a moment, Emma hung in space with the kind of perfect balance that made difficult physical feats appear effortless. Then her fingers, slightly damp with nervous perspiration, lost their purchase on the metal ring. She fell backward toward the ground, with the terrible slow-motion clarity that accompanies unexpected accidents, her body twisting as she attempted to control her landing. The impact came with sickening finality. Emma's left arm hit the ground first, followed by her shoulder and the side of her head. The playground's safety surface, designed to cushion exactly this type of fall, seemed inadequate against the force of her landing. For several seconds, Emma lay motionless, while other children gathered around her with the horrified fascination that accidents inspire. Then the crying began, not the immediate wail of surprise that accompanied minor playground injuries, but the deep, breathless sobbing that indicated real pain and genuine fear. Emma struggled to sit up, cradling her left arm against her body, while tears streamed down her face. "Get Miss Peterson!" Sophia shouted to the nearest child, her voice carrying the authority of someone who understood the seriousness of the situation. "And tell her to hurry!" Claire was in the classroom, preparing materials for the afternoon's art project, when Tommy Rodriguez burst through the door with the kind of urgency that immediately triggered her emergency protocols. "Miss Peterson, Emma fell off the monkey bars, and she's crying really hard, and her arm looks funny." Claire's training took over, with automatic efficiency. She grabbed the first aid kit and radio from her desk, alerted the main office while moving toward the playground, and mentally reviewed the steps for assessing potential serious injuries. Her professional composure masked the personal concern that struck her when she saw Emma sitting on the ground, surrounded by worried classmates, clutching her arm with obvious distress. "Okay, everyone step back and give Emma some space," Claire directed with calm authority, kneeling beside the injured child, while quickly assessing her condition. Emma's left arm hung at an awkward angle that suggested a possible fracture, and a lump was already forming on the side of her head where it had impacted the ground. "It hurts really bad," Emma whimpered, her usual articulate communication reduced to simple expressions of pain. "I can't move my arm right." Claire performed a careful examination without moving Emma's injured limb, checking for signs of serious head trauma while offering the kind of steady reassurance that had been honed through years of managing childhood emergencies. "I know it hurts, sweetheart. We're going to take very good care of you. Can you tell me if anything else hurts besides your arm?" "My head feels weird," Emma replied, wincing as she shifted position. "And I feel kind of sick." The combination of symptoms elevated Claire's concern from probable fracture to possible concussion situation that required immediate medical attention and parental notification. She radioed for the school nurse while maintaining conversation with Emma to monitor her mental clarity and responsiveness. "We're going to call your dad and have him meet us at the hospital," Claire explained gently. "The doctors there have special machines that can take pictures of your arm and make sure everything's okay." The mention of her father triggered fresh tears from Emma, though whether from pain, fear, or concern about worrying Mark was unclear. Claire stayed beside her throughout the wait for emergency responders, providing physical comfort and emotional support while coordinating the complex logistics of playground accident management. The ambulance arrived within minutes, its presence transforming the school's afternoon routine into something resembling a medical drama. Paramedics performed their own assessment of Emma's condition, while Claire provided details about the accident and her observations of Emma's symptoms. The consensus was clear: suspected fractured radius and possible mild concussion requiring immediate emergency room evaluation. "Is my dad coming?" Emma asked as paramedics prepared her for transport, her voice small and frightened in a way that broke Claire's heart. "He's meeting us at the hospital," Claire assured her, though she hadn't yet confirmed Mark's availability. The school had left urgent messages at his office, but workplace emergencies didn't always allow for immediate response to family crises. As the ambulance prepared to depart, Claire faced a decision that went beyond her professional responsibilities. Standard protocol required her to remain at school, ensuring proper documentation and parent notification while maintaining supervision of her remaining students. But something about Emma's frightened expression and the knowledge that Mark might arrive at the hospital to find his daughter alone with strangers made the choice simple. "I'm going to ride with Emma to the hospital," she told the principal, who had arrived to coordinate the emergency response. "Can you arrange coverage for my classroom? I want to make sure she's not alone if her father is delayed." The decision felt both natural and significant, a step beyond the boundaries of teacher-student relationships into territory that was more personal and emotionally invested. Claire settled into the ambulance beside Emma's stretcher, holding the child's uninjured hand while paramedics monitored her vital signs during the short drive to Riverside General Hospital. Mark received the call during a staff meeting that had seemed interminably boring until his phone buzzed with the caller ID for Emma's school. The administrative assistant's voice, professionally calm but carrying unmistakable urgency, transformed his world with a few simple sentences. "Mr. Sullivan, this is Nancy from Riverside Elementary. Emma has been injured during recess and is being transported to the hospital. She's conscious and alert, but we believe she may have a broken arm." The remainder of the conversation passed in a blur of medical terminology and logistical details. Possible concussion. Emergency room evaluation. Ms. Peterson, accompanying Emma to ensure she wasn't alone. Mark left the meeting without explanation, grabbed his keys, and drove to the hospital with the kind of focused terror that parents reserve for moments when their children's safety hangs in the balance. The emergency room at Riverside General held the familiar, controlled chaos of medical crisis management. Mark approached the reception desk with Emma's insurance card and his identification, trying to project calm competence while his heart raced with parental anxiety. "Emma Sullivan, 8 years old, transported by ambulance from Riverside Elementary," he told the receptionist, his voice steadier than he felt. "Room 7, the woman replied with practiced efficiency. "Follow the blue line on the floor. Her teacher is with her." Mark navigated the corridor with automatic precision, following the painted blue line while mentally preparing for whatever condition he might find Emma in. The possibility of serious injury of complications that might affect her future mobility or cognitive function created scenarios too frightening to fully contemplate. Room 7 contained a scene that was both better and more complex than Mark had anticipated. Emma lay on the examination table with her left arm immobilized in a temporary sling, her face pale but alert as she answered questions from a nurse who was checking her pupils with a small flashlight. Beside the bed, Claire Peterson sat in a plastic chair, holding Emma's uninjured hand and speaking in the calm, reassuring tone that Mark recognized from parent conferences. "Daddy!" Emma exclaimed when she saw him, her voice carrying relief and residual pain in equal measure. "I fell off the monkey bars and my arm really hurts, but Miss Peterson stayed with me the whole time." Mark approached the bed with careful composure, kissing Emma's forehead while quickly assessing her condition. The temporary sling and alert demeanor suggested serious but not catastrophic injury, a broken bone, rather than the life-threatening scenarios his imagination had conjured during the drive to the hospital. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner," he said, smoothing Emma's hair with one hand while reaching for Claire's shoulder with the other, a gesture of gratitude that felt both natural and unexpectedly intimate. "Thank you for staying with her." Claire looked up with an expression that carried relief at his arrival, and something else, depth of concern that seemed to extend beyond professional obligation. "She's been very brave," Claire replied. "The paramedics think it's a clean fracture, and her cognitive responses have been excellent." Dr. Jennifer Chen, the emergency room physician, arrived to provide official assessment and treatment recommendations. Her examination confirmed the suspected diagnosis: fracture of the left radius requiring orthopedic consultation and casting, plus mild concussion requiring observation but no immediate intervention. "She'll need a cast for 6 to 8 weeks, Dr. Chen explained, while reviewing X-ray images on a computer screen. "The fracture is well aligned, so we don't anticipate surgical intervention. As for the concussion, we'll want to monitor her for the next 24 hours for any changes in symptoms, but her current presentation is reassuring." The medical consultation proceeded with the efficiency of routine pediatric trauma care. Mark signed consent forms, received instructions for concussion monitoring, and listened to detailed explanations of cast care and activity restrictions. Throughout the process, Claire remained beside Emma's bed, offering comfort and distraction during medical procedures with the natural ease of someone accustomed to managing childhood distress. "Will I be able to write my stories?" Emma asked Dr. Chen, with concern that seemed to transcend her physical discomfort. "I'm working on something really important." "You'll learn to write with your right hand," the doctor assured her. "Lots of children discover they're more ambidextrous than they thought, and typing might actually be easier than handwriting once your fingers are free." As the medical team prepared Emma's cast, Mark found himself in the family consultation area with Claire, waiting while their daughter, for somehow Emma had become their shared responsibility during this crisis, received treatment. The quiet space, designed for private conversations during medical emergencies, created an atmosphere of intimacy that transformed their usual careful interactions. "I can't thank you enough for staying with her," Mark said, his voice carrying emotions that extended beyond gratitude. "Knowing she wasn't alone while I was trying to get here, it means everything." Claire studied him with the direct attention he had noticed during their previous conversations, as though she were seeing him clearly for the first time. "I couldn't have left her," she replied simply. "Emma's special to me in ways that go beyond my professional responsibilities." The statement hung between them with unspoken implications. Mark had sensed Claire's particular fondness for Emma, but hearing it articulated created awareness of deeper connections that had been developing beneath their formal interactions. "She talks about you constantly at home," Mark admitted. "Your teaching style, your recommendations for books, your insights into her personality. I think you understand her in ways that even I sometimes miss." Claire smiled with an expression that seemed both pleased and slightly vulnerable. "Emma has this remarkable ability to make adults feel seen and appreciated. She notices details about people's emotional states that most children her age completely miss. Sometimes, I think she's taking care of all of us, rather than the reverse." The observation echoed insights Mark had been developing about Emma's emotional sophistication, her tendency to monitor and manage adult feelings with surprising skill. Her therapist mentioned that children who experience early loss sometimes develop heightened emotional intelligence. They become experts at reading adult moods because their security depends on maintaining stability for the important people in their lives. Claire's expression shifted with sudden understanding. "Emma's mother died when she was very young?" 5 years old, Mark confirmed, surprised by the relief that accompanied sharing this fundamental fact about their family history. "Cancer. Sarah was diagnosed when Emma was 3, so Emma lived through the entire illness and treatment process. She experienced loss in ways that shaped her understanding of how fragile happiness can be." The information seemed to unlock something in Claire's demeanor, a recognition that explained patterns she had observed in Emma's behavior and perhaps Mark's own careful emotional control. That explains so much about her maturity and her concern for other people's feelings. She's learned to be a caretaker because she understands how quickly circumstances can change. Mark nodded, appreciating Claire's immediate grasp of the complex dynamics that loss had created in their family. "I've tried to balance honoring her emotional intelligence with ensuring she gets to be a child rather than taking responsibility for adult problems. It's not always easy to find that line." "You've done an extraordinary job with her," Claire said with conviction that carried the weight of professional expertise. "Emma's resilience and empathy are testament to the stability and love you've provided, but—" She hesitated, as though considering whether to continue. "But what?" Claire took a breath before responding with careful honesty. "Sometimes I wonder if you've been so focused on Emma's healing that you've neglected your own. Single parenting is incredibly isolating, especially when you're processing grief while trying to provide emotional support for someone else." The insight cut deeper than Mark had expected, touching on truths he had been avoiding for 3 years. "Emma's needs have to come first," he replied, though the words sounded less convincing than they once had. "Of course they do," Claire agreed, "but children need to see their parents modeling healthy relationships and emotional fulfillment. Emma's been watching you sacrifice your own happiness for her sake, and I think she's starting to feel responsible for making sure you're okay." Before Mark could respond, Dr. Chen appeared to inform them that Emma's cast was complete and she was ready for discharge. They returned to room 7 to find Emma admiring her bright purple casta color choice that had apparently been easy to make while a nurse provided final instructions for care and activity restrictions. "It matches my notebook," Emma announced with satisfaction that seemed disproportionate to her recent trauma. "And look, there's space for people to sign it." Mark smiled at his daughter's ability to find positive aspects in difficult situations, though Claire's observations about Emma's emotional caretaking had created new awareness of the complex motivations behind her resilience. The drive home proceeded carefully, with Emma settled in the back seat surrounded by discharge instructions, pain medication, and a collection of hospital stickers that she had charmed from various medical personnel. Claire had offered to follow them home to ensure Emma's comfort during the transition, an offer that Mark had accepted with gratitude that extended beyond practical concerns. At their house, Claire helped Emma settle on the living room couch, with pillows, blankets, and entertainment options arranged within easy reach of her uninjured hand. The domestic scene felt both natural and surreal. Claire moving through their home with the familiarity of someone who belonged there, Emma accepting her care with complete comfort, Mark observing interactions that suggested relationships more complex than teacher-student or parent-educator dynamics. "I should head home and let you both rest," Claire said, as Emma dozed on the couch, exhausted by the day's trauma and pain medication. "But please call if you need anything, help with homework accommodations, questions about the injury recovery, anything at all." Mark walked her to the door, aware that their interaction throughout the emergency had shifted their relationship in ways that would be difficult to ignore. "Claire?" he said, using her first name deliberately for perhaps the first time. "What you did today, staying with Emma, being there for both of us. It was beyond anything I had a right to expect." Claire paused in the doorway, turning to face him with an expression that seemed to contain both vulnerability and resolution. "Mark, there's something I should tell you about why Emma's situation feels so personal to me." Mark waited, sensing that whatever Claire was about to share would complete the emotional honesty that had begun in the hospital consultation room. "I was married for 2 years to a wonderful man named David," Claire began, her voice steady but weighted with memory. "He was killed in a car accident 3 years ago, just 6 months after we learned I was pregnant." The information hit Mark with unexpected force, not just the fact of Claire's loss, but the timing that paralleled their own family's trauma. "Claire, I had no idea. You lost your husband and—" "I lost the baby too," Claire said quietly. "Miscarriage. 2 weeks after David's funeral. The stress, the grief. My body just couldn't maintain the pregnancy." Mark felt his chest tighten with recognition of the kind of compounded loss that redefined everything about future possibilities. "I'm so sorry. I can't imagine processing both losses simultaneously." Claire's smile carried sadness but also strength. "It's why I went back to teaching elementary school instead of pursuing administration like David and I had planned. Being around children, helping them navigate their own challenges, it became a way of honoring what I'd lost while finding purpose in what remained." The revelation transformed Mark's understanding of Claire's investment in Emma's welfare and her insights into their family's dynamics. "You recognized what Emma was going through because you'd experienced similar loss. Different circumstances, but the same process of rebuilding life around absence," Claire agreed. "And watching you navigate single parenthood with such dedication, it's been inspiring but also concerning. I see you making the same mistakes I made, initially believing that honoring lost love requires avoiding new connections." Mark studied Claire's face, seeing her clearly for the first time as someone who understood the geography of grief from personal experience rather than professional observation. How do you move forward without feeling like you're betraying what you had?" "Very slowly," Claire replied honestly. "And with the understanding that love isn't a finite resource, caring about new people doesn't diminish what you felt for those you've lost. It honors their memory by proving that they taught you how to love well." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Claire sharing details about her own healing process and Mark describing the challenges of maintaining Emma's stability while processing his own emotional needs. When Claire finally left, promising to check on Emma's school adjustment the following day, Mark found himself sitting beside his sleeping daughter with a sense of possibility that had been absent from his life for 3 years. Emma stirred on the couch, opening her eyes with the drowsy confusion that followed afternoon naps. "Is Miss Peterson still here?" "She just left," Mark replied, smoothing Emma's hair with gentle fingers. "She wanted to make sure you were comfortable before going home." Emma smiled with satisfaction that seemed to extend beyond her physical comfort. "She's really nice, Dad. And she likes you." The observation, delivered with 8-year-old directness, carried implications that Mark was finally ready to acknowledge. "What makes you think that?" "She gets happy when she talks to you," Emma replied with the matter-of-fact tone she used for obvious conclusions. "And she stayed at the hospital even though she didn't have to. That's what people do when they care about someone more than just regular caring." Mark considered his daughter's analysis, recognizing the emotional intelligence that had been apparent in her matchmaking schemes and her note about his deserving happiness. "Em, would you be okay if Miss Peterson and I spent time together outside of school stuff?" Emma's face lit up with triumph that confirmed Mark's suspicions about her deliberate orchestration of their interactions. "Really? You want to have dates with Miss Peterson?" "Maybe," Mark replied, smiling at his daughter's enthusiasm. "If she's interested, and if you think it's a good idea." "It's the best idea ever," Emma declared with certainty that suggested she had been hoping for exactly this development. "She makes you smile with your real smile, and she knows how to take care of people who are sad sometimes." As evening settled over their home, Mark reflected on the day's unexpected revelations. Emma's accident had forced him and Claire together in circumstances that bypassed their usual careful boundaries, creating space for honesty about their shared experiences of loss and healing. The emergency had served as the catalyst Emma had been seeking, not through her deliberate planning, but through the kind of crisis that revealed what people truly meant to each other. For the first time since Sarah's death, Mark allowed himself to imagine a future that included romantic love alongside parental devotion. Claire's understanding of grief and single parenthood, her genuine care for Emma, and her insights into the balance between honoring the past and embracing new possibilities suggested compatibility that extended far beyond Emma's matchmaking schemes. That night, as Mark helped Emma prepare for bed with one-handed toothbrushing and modified pajama arrangements, he found himself genuinely excited about tomorrow's possibilities rather than simply focused on managing the next challenge. Emma's purple cast, initially a symbol of injury and disruption, had become a reminder that sometimes unexpected events created opportunities for connection that careful planning couldn't achieve. "Dad," Emma said as Mark tucked her into bed, arranging pillows to support her injured arm, "thank you for letting Ms. Peterson take care of us today." "Thank you for having such good instincts about people," Mark replied, kissing her forehead with gratitude that encompassed both her emotional wisdom and her eventual recovery. "I think Ms. Peterson might become a very important part of our lives." Emma's smile and the dim glow of her nightlight suggested she had been hoping for exactly this outcome all along. The December morning arrived gray and overcast, with the kind of persistent drizzle that transformed Chicago into a watercolor painting of muted tones and soft edges. Mark stood at the kitchen window, watching droplets trace irregular paths down the glass, while Emma sat at the breakfast table, awkwardly maneuvering her spoon with her right hand as she worked through a bowl of cereal. 3 weeks had passed since her accident, and she had adapted to the purple cast with the resilience that continued to amaze him, though simple tasks like eating and writing still required concentration and patience. "Miss Peterson said she might stop by this weekend to bring my makeup assignments," Emma mentioned with the carefully casual tone she used when discussing topics she considered strategically important. "She wants to make sure I'm not falling behind while my writing hand is broken." Mark smiled at his daughter's transparent attempt to orchestrate another encounter with Claire. In the weeks since the hospital emergency, their interactions had evolved beyond the formal boundaries of parent-teacher relationships, though Mark remained uncertain about the appropriate pace for this progression. Claire had called twice to check on Emma's recovery, had arranged for modified assignments that accommodated her cast, and had stopped by the house once to deliver books that Emma might enjoy during her restricted activity period. Each interaction felt both natural and significant, charged with possibilities that Mark was still learning to acknowledge. "That's very thoughtful of her," Mark replied, though his voice carried warmth that extended beyond appreciation for Claire's professional dedication. "You're lucky to have a teacher who cares so much about your progress." Emma looked up from her cereal with the direct gaze she reserved for important observations. "She doesn't just care about my schoolwork, Dad. She cares about our family. That's different." The distinction, delivered with 8-year-old clarity, highlighted the complexity of emotions that had been developing since Claire had stayed with Emma at the hospital. Mark had found himself thinking about Claire at unexpected moments, wondering about her weekend plans, remembering the sound of her laugh, anticipating their next conversation with an eagerness that felt both exciting and troubling. The guilt had begun almost immediately after Claire's revelation about her own losses. During quiet moments, when Emma was occupied with homework or television, Mark would find himself mentally apologizing to Sarah for the happiness he felt when thinking about Claire. The logical part of his mind understood that 3 years was a reasonable period for grief, that moving forward honored rather than betrayed Sarah's memory, and that Emma needed to see him capable of joy rather than perpetual mourning. But emotions, Mark was learning, operated according to their own logic that often contradicted rational analysis. The previous evening, while helping Emma with her modified homework routine, Mark had caught himself actually humming while organizing her school supplies. The realization had stopped him mid-melody as he recognized that he hadn't hummed unconsciously since before Sarah's diagnosis. The return of such casual happiness felt like both a gift and a betrayal, evidence of healing that he wasn't certain he deserved. "Dad, you have your thinking too hard face on," Emma observed, interrupting his internal analysis. "Are you worried about something?" Mark refocused on his daughter, noting her expression of concern that seemed disproportionate to his momentary distraction. "Just planning the day, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about." Emma studied him with the perceptive attention he had learned to recognize as her assessment mode. "Are you thinking about Miss Peterson? Because you get a different kind of quiet when you're thinking about her compared to when you're thinking about work stuff or grocery lists." The accuracy of her observations startled Mark. When had his 8-year-old daughter become such an expert reader of his emotional states? "What makes you think I'm thinking about Miss Peterson?" "You smile a little bit when you think about her, even when you're trying not to," Emma explained with scientific precision. "And you check your phone more often on the days when she might call or text about my schoolwork." Mark felt heat rise in his cheeks, embarrassed to have his growing feelings decoded so accurately by someone who still needed help reaching tall shelves. Adult relationships are complicated. Even when people like each other, there are lots of factors to consider. "Like what?" Emma asked with genuine curiosity. Mark considered how to explain the complex intersection of grief, parental responsibility, and romantic possibility to someone whose understanding of love had been shaped by Disney movies and playground observations. "Well, you know how much I loved your mother, right?" Emma nodded solemnly. "You loved her the most in the whole world." "That's right, and sometimes, when people lose someone they love that much, they worry that caring about someone new means they didn't love the first person enough. It's confusing for grown-ups." Emma considered this explanation with the serious attention she devoted to challenging math problems. "But Dad, loving Mommy and liking Miss Peterson aren't the same kind of thing. Mommy is always going to be my mom and your wife who died. Miss Peterson would be something different, something new." The insight, delivered with matter-of-fact clarity, captured a distinction that Mark had been struggling to articulate even to himself. Emma understood intuitively what his adult mind had been overcomplicating, that new love didn't compete with past love, but occupied its own space in the geography of the heart. "When did you become so wise about love?" Mark asked, genuinely curious about his daughter's sophisticated understanding of emotional complexity. Emma shrugged with 8-year-old nonchalance. "I think about stuff a lot. And I remember things Mommy used to say about love and family and being happy." Before Mark could pursue this intriguing comment further, his phone buzzed with a text message from Claire. "Hi. Emma mentioned yesterday that she's been having trouble with her science project because of the cast. I have some ideas that might help if you'd like me to stop by this afternoon. Let me know if that works for your schedule." Mark showed the message to Emma, whose face lit up with an enthusiasm that confirmed his suspicions about her deliberate cultivation of reasons for Claire to visit their home. "She's so nice to think about my science project," Emma said with impressive theatrical innocence. "We should definitely say yes." "Emma Sullivan," Mark said with mock sternness. "Are you scheming again?" Emma's grin revealed exactly how much scheming had been involved in her mentions of academic difficulties. "Maybe a little bit. But I really do need help with the project. And Miss Peterson has the best ideas for making learning fun." Mark typed a response, accepting Claire's offer, then spent the remainder of the morning cleaning the house with the kind of thorough attention usually reserved for visits from his mother-in-law. He found himself changing shirts twice, choosing casual clothes that appeared effortless while actually requiring considerable deliberation. The behavior struck him as simultaneously ridiculous and thrilling. When had he last cared about his appearance for someone other than professional obligations? Emma observed these preparations with obvious satisfaction, occasionally offering suggestions about flower arrangements or snack selections, with the expertise of someone who had been planning this encounter for weeks. Her cast had become a prop in her ongoing matchmaking campaign, a visible symbol of vulnerability that invited continued care and attention from the adult she had identified as perfect for their family. Claire arrived at 2:00 p.m., carrying a canvas bag filled with modified science project materials, and wearing the kind of casual weekend clothes that made her seem more approachable than her professional classroom attire. Mark opened the door to find her examining their front porch decorations. Emma's Halloween pumpkins that had evolved into Thanksgiving gourds and were now being repurposed as early Christmas decor. Emma's artistic vision? Claire asked, gesturing toward a particularly creative arrangement of gourds, pine cones, and battery-operated string lights. She insisted that holiday decorations should evolve organically rather than being completely replaced, Mark explained, stepping aside to invite Claire into their home. I've learned that arguing with her design philosophy is futile. Claire laughed, the sound filling their entryway with warmth that seemed to brighten the gray afternoon. She has strong opinions about aesthetic choices. Yesterday she reorganized our classroom library according to cover color coordination rather than reading level. I didn't have the heart to change it back. In the living room, Emma was arranged on the couch with her science materials spread across the coffee table like a student staging a tableau of academic dedication. Her injured arm was positioned dramatically, ensuring maximum visibility of the purple cast that had become central to her current identity. Ms. Peterson, thank you so much for coming to help with my project, Emma said with the formal gratitude she had been practicing. I've been having lots of trouble because of my broken arm. Claire settled beside Emma on the couch, examining the project requirements with professional assessment. Let's see what we're working with. Build a model of the solar system using household materials. That's definitely challenging, with limited hand mobility. For the next hour, Mark observed Claire's teaching style in their domestic environment, noting how she adapted complex instructions to accommodate Emma's physical limitations while maintaining academic rigor. She suggested modifications that actually enhanced the project's creativity, turning Emma's injury into an opportunity for innovative problem-solving rather than academic compromise. What if we use different-sized balls from your sports equipment box to represent the planets? Claire proposed. Then we can hang them from that ceiling light fixture using fishing line. It'll create a three-dimensional model that's more accurate than the usual flat poster board versions. Emma's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm as she visualized the enhanced project. And we could paint them the right colors. Jupiter could be the basketball, and Mars could be the tennis ball. Mark found himself drawn into the planning process, contributing suggestions about materials and construction techniques while enjoying the collaborative energy that Claire brought to their usually quiet afternoon routines. Her presence seemed to amplify Emma's natural curiosity, while providing Mark with insights into his daughter's learning style that he hadn't fully appreciated. As they worked on assembling the planetary mobile, their conversation flowed naturally from Emma's academic progress to broader topics about child development, creative teaching methods, and their shared observations about how children processed complex information. Mark discovered that Claire's educational philosophy aligned remarkably with his own parenting values, emphasizing emotional intelligence alongside academic achievement. Emma has this wonderful ability to connect abstract concepts to personal experiences, Claire observed while helping Emma paint Saturn's rings. When we studied the water cycle, she explained evaporation by comparing it to how tears dry on your face when you're sad. It showed understanding that went far beyond memorizing scientific terminology. Mark smiled at the example, recognizing Emma's tendency to find emotional metaphors for academic concepts. She's always made those kinds of connections. After Sarah died, she explained grief to her kindergarten class by saying it was like having a permanent storm cloud that sometimes rained and sometimes just made everything look gray. The reference to Sarah's death felt natural in this context, no longer the conversational landmine it had been for the first 2 years after her passing. Claire's own experience with loss had created space for honest discussion about grief without the uncomfortable sympathy or awkward topic changes that had characterized most interactions with other adults. Children often understand emotional complexity better than adults give them credit for, Claire replied. They haven't learned to compartmentalize feelings the way we have, so they see connections that we miss. As afternoon faded toward evening, Claire helped Emma clean up the project materials while Mark prepared coffee and arranged the store-bought cookies he had strategically purchased that morning. The domestic scene felt both scripted and spontaneous. Emma had clearly orchestrated the encounter, but the easy intimacy between adults was developing according to its own authentic rhythm. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" Mark asked as Claire gathered her things. "Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and salad, but Emma would love the company." Claire hesitated, and Mark recognized the careful calculation behind her pause. Accepting would shift their interaction from academic assistance to social engagement, crossing boundaries that had been carefully maintained despite their growing personal connection. "Please stay, Miss Peterson," Emma added with enthusiasm that seemed genuine rather than manipulative. "Dad makes really good spaghetti sauce, and I want to show you my room and all my books." "I'd love to stay," Claire decided, her smile suggesting the invitation was welcome rather than merely polite. Dinner preparation became a collaborative effort, with Claire chopping vegetables while Mark managed the sauce and Emma provided commentary from her position at the kitchen table. Their conversation ranged from cooking techniques to travel experiences to favorite books, revealing shared interests and compatible values that extended far beyond their mutual concern for Emma's welfare. "You've traveled quite a bit," Mark observed, noting Claire's familiarity with various international cuisines and cultural references. "David and I had planned to spend our first few years of marriage exploring different countries before settling down to have children," Claire explained without the careful, emotional distance that had characterized her previous mentions of her late husband. "After he died, I used some of our savings to take the trips we'd planned together. It felt like honoring our dreams while figuring out how to live with the reality of loss." Emma looked up from her careful one-handed drawing with sudden interest. "That's really smart. Like doing the happy things you planned, even when the sad things happened instead." "Exactly," Claire agreed, impressed by Emma's understanding. "Sometimes the best way to honor people we've lost is to continue pursuing the joy they wanted us to have." Mark felt something shift in his chest as he absorbed the implications of Claire's philosophy. For 3 years, he had been preserving Sarah's memory through careful maintenance of their shared routines and traditions, but he hadn't considered that moving forward might actually honor her values more effectively than remaining static. After dinner, Emma led Claire on an extensive tour of her bedroom, showcasing her book collection, art projects, and the elaborate organizational systems she had developed for her various interests. Mark followed at a respectful distance, observing Emma's pride in sharing her personal space with someone she clearly considered important. "This is my special memory box," Emma explained, pulling a decorated shoebox from her closet. "It has pictures and letters and special things from when Mommy was alive." Claire examined the contents with appropriate reverence, commenting on family photos and listening to Emma's explanations about various mementos. Mark watched this interaction with emotions that surprised him in their complexity: gratitude for Claire's genuine interest in their family history, relief that Emma felt comfortable sharing her most precious memories, and something else that he was hesitant to identify as hope. "Your mommy was very beautiful," Claire said, studying a photo from Mark and Sarah's wedding. "And you look just like her around the eyes." "Everyone says that," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "But Dad says I have her laugh and her way of thinking about things too." As Claire prepared to leave that evening, Emma hugged her goodbye, with the unself-conscious affection she reserved for people she trusted completely. "Thank you for helping with my science project and for staying for dinner. You make our house feel more like a family." The comment, delivered with 8-year-old honesty, crystallized feelings that Mark had been struggling to articulate. Claire's presence did transform their careful duo into something that felt more complete, more joyful, more alive with possibility. "I had a wonderful time," Claire replied, her voice carrying genuine warmth. "Thank you for including me in your evening." Mark walked Claire to her car, noting how the December evening had turned crisp and clear, with stars visible despite the city's light pollution. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything today, but also for the way you've been there for Emma, for both of us really." Claire turned to face him in the dim glow of the streetlight, her expression serious but not unreadable. "Mark, I hope you know that spending time with your family isn't an obligation for me. I genuinely enjoy being here." The statement hung between them with implications that felt both obvious and terrifying. Mark recognized the opening for honesty about his own feelings, but the words seemed too significant for a casual doorway conversation. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said at the hospital," he began carefully. "About honoring lost love by remaining open to new connections. It's harder than it sounds." "It is," Claire agreed. "Guilt is part of the healing process, even when it doesn't make logical sense. But Mark, if I may say something a bit forward?" Mark nodded, uncertain what to expect but trusting Claire's judgment about emotional complexity. "Emma needs to see you capable of happiness that doesn't depend entirely on being her father. She's an extraordinary child, but she's also 8 years old, carrying emotional responsibility that should belong to adults. Showing her that you can find joy with other people might actually be the greatest gift you could give her." That night, after Emma had been tucked into bed with her usual routine of stories, songs, and philosophical conversations about the day's events, Mark found himself sitting in Sarah's chair by the living room window. The habit had evolved from painful necessity into peaceful reflection, a time for processing emotions and making sense of the day's experiences. For the first time since Sarah's death, Mark allowed himself to fully acknowledge his feelings for Claire Peterson. The attraction was undeniable: her intelligence, her warmth, her understanding of both loss and healing, her genuine affection for Emma. But beyond attraction was something deeper: the recognition that Claire's presence in their lives had awakened possibilities he had forgotten existed. The guilt was still there, but it felt different now, less like betrayal, and more like the natural resistance that accompanied any significant change. Sarah had loved him enough to want his happiness even after her death. The logical certainty of this truth was beginning to override the emotional barriers he had constructed around his heart. The following weekend arrived with the kind of crisp winter sunshine that made Chicago beautiful despite the cold. Mark and Emma had planned a day of holiday shopping, a tradition they had maintained with modifications since Sarah's death. This year, Emma had specifically requested a stop at the bookstore where Claire had mentioned working part-time during weekends, a suggestion that Mark had accepted with the kind of transparent motivation that made him grateful for Emma's matchmaking instincts. They found Claire in the children's section, reading a picture book to a small group of preschoolers gathered around a colorful carpet. Her weekend attire, jeans and a soft green sweater that complemented her auburn hair, made her seem more accessible than her professional classroom presence. Mark and Emma positioned themselves near the display shelves, pretending to browse while actually observing Claire's interaction with the children. "She's really good at reading stories," Emma whispered with obvious pride. "Listen to how she does different voices for all the characters." Mark found himself captivated by Claire's animated storytelling, noting how she engaged even the most restless children through dramatic gestures and vocal variety. When the story session concluded and parents collected their children, Claire spotted Mark and Emma approaching with expressions of pleased surprise. "What brings you to my weekend workplace?" Claire asked, her smile suggesting genuine pleasure at the unexpected encounter. "Holiday shopping," Emma replied promptly. "And Dad said we needed new books for winter reading, and I remembered you said you work here sometimes." Mark appreciated Emma's diplomatic phrasing, which made their visit seem coincidental rather than deliberately planned. "We try to support local businesses when possible," he added, though his focus was primarily on Claire rather than the bookstore's merchandise. "Well, you've come to the right place," Claire said, gesturing toward the extensive children's section. "What kind of books are you looking for?" The next hour passed in pleasant browsing, with Claire providing expert recommendations for Emma's reading level while engaging Mark in discussions about literature, education, and the importance of independent bookstores in community building. Their conversation flowed with the easy familiarity that had been developing over months of interaction, though Mark remained acutely aware of the domestic intimacy implied by weekend encounters outside their usual school-related contexts. "Dad, can we look at the art books?" Emma asked, though her attention seemed focused on providing her father and Claire with private conversation time rather than genuine interest in artistic texts. As Emma wandered toward the art section, Mark found himself alone with Claire among the picture books and early readers. "I hope we're not interrupting your work," he said, though his tone suggested he was pleased rather than concerned about the potential disruption. "Not at all," Claire assured him. "I enjoy seeing familiar faces, especially when they come with good book recommendations to share." Mark recognized the opening for more personal conversation. "Claire, I've been thinking about what you said the other night about Emma needing to see me capable of happiness with other people. I think you're right, but I'm not entirely sure how to move forward appropriately." Claire studied his expression with the careful attention he had learned to associate with her moments of professional assessment. "What would moving forward appropriately look like to you?" The question forced Mark to articulate hopes he had been avoiding examining too closely. "I think it would look like spending time together outside of school and Emma-related activities. Getting to know each other as adults, rather than just as Emma's father and teacher." "I would like that," Claire replied simply, her directness cutting through the complexity he had been creating around his feelings. "I've been hoping you might ask." The admission sent warmth through Mark's chest that had nothing to do with the bookstore's heating system. "Really? Really?" Claire confirmed with a smile that carried both affection and gentle amusement at his surprise. "Mark, I've been attracted to you since our first parent conference, but I couldn't say anything while maintaining professional boundaries. Now that Emma's accident has brought us together in different circumstances." Before Claire could complete her thought, Emma reappeared with an armload of art books and an expression of satisfaction that suggested she had been monitoring their conversation from a strategic distance. "I found some really good books about famous artists," she announced. "And I couldn't help overhearing that you and Ms. Peterson want to spend more time together. I think that's an excellent idea." Mark felt his cheeks warm with embarrassment at having his romantic interests decoded so accurately by his 8-year-old daughter, though Emma's obvious approval made the situation less mortifying than it might have been. "Emma Sullivan," he said with mock severity, "have you been eavesdropping on adult conversations?" "Only a little bit," Emma replied with complete honesty. "And only because I wanted to make sure you were being brave about asking Ms. Peterson on dates." Claire laughed at Emma's matter-of-fact acknowledgement of her matchmaking agenda. "Well, it sounds like we have Emma's permission to explore this relationship." "You definitely have my permission," Emma confirmed solemnly. "In fact, I think you should have your first official date soon, so you can start being happy in the grown-up way instead of just the dad way." That evening, after Emma had been settled with her bedtime routine and Mark had confirmed that Claire was available for dinner the following Friday, he found himself in an unexpectedly reflective mood. The progression from grief to possibility had occurred so gradually that he could barely identify the specific moments when his emotional landscape had shifted. Claire's presence in their lives had created space for healing that he hadn't recognized he needed. As he prepared for bed, Mark paused outside Emma's room, listening to her soft breathing and feeling overwhelmed with gratitude for his daughter's wisdom. Somehow, his 8-year-old had understood what he had been too frightened to acknowledge, that moving forward honored rather than betrayed their love for Sarah, and that their family's future could include new joy without diminishing old memories. The following Wednesday, as Mark was organizing Emma's school supplies after dinner, she appeared beside him with her sparkly purple notebook and an expression of unusual seriousness. "Dad, I want to show you something," she said, opening the notebook to reveal pages of careful observations about his behavior, Claire's responses, and strategic notes about encouraging their relationship. "I've been working on Operation Make Daddy Smile for a really long time," Mark examined his daughter's detailed documentation with amazement. Emma had recorded his emotional states, noted Claire's interest patterns, and developed sophisticated strategies for creating opportunities for interaction. The thoroughness of her planning was both impressive and slightly concerning in its implications about her sense of responsibility for his happiness. This is remarkable work," Mark said honestly. "But I need you to understand something important. You are not responsible for making me happy. That's not a job for 8-year-olds. Emma considered this statement with characteristic seriousness. "But I wanted to help because I could see that you were lonely even when you were trying not to be. And Ms. Peterson is perfect for our family, so it seemed obvious that you should be together." "What made you so certain that Ms. Peterson was perfect for us?" Mark asked, genuinely curious about his daughter's assessment criteria. Emma flipped through her notebook to a page titled, "Why Miss Stavris Peterson is Right for Dad," and began reading her carefully compiled evidence. "She understands about being sad sometimes, but not staying sad forever. She thinks I'm smart, but not in a way that makes other kids feel bad. She asks about you even when she doesn't have to. She smells like vanilla and reads the best story voices and knows how to make learning fun. And most important, she makes you smile with your real smile instead of your careful dad smile." Mark felt his throat tighten with emotion as he listened to Emma's analysis. His daughter had been studying their emotional dynamics with remarkable sophistication, developing insights about adult relationships that seemed impossible for someone her age. "There's one more thing," Emma said, turning to the final page of her notebook. "I wanted to find out what Mommy would think about Miss Peterson, so I went looking for clues about what she wanted for our family." Before Mark could ask what she meant, Emma left the room and returned with a small wooden box he recognized as Sarah's jewelry container. Inside, beneath rings and earrings she had worn during their marriage, Emma had discovered a collection of letters notes that Sarah had written to Mark during their courtship and early marriage. "I found these last week when I was looking for pictures for my school project," Emma explained, "and there's one that I think you should read." She handed Mark a letter dated just 6 months before Sarah's cancer diagnosis, written in the flowing handwriting he remembered with painful clarity. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the familiar stationery. "My dearest Mark," the letter began, and Mark could hear Sarah's voice in the words as though she were speaking from across the room. "I've been thinking about love and marriage, and what it means to promise to care for someone forever. Today I watched you with Emma at the park, and I realized that loving you isn't just about our relationship, it's about witnessing the extraordinary father and human being you are every single day." Mark paused in his reading, overwhelmed by the immediate presence Sarah's words created in their living room. Emma sat beside him, her expression solemn as she waited for him to continue. "If something ever happens to me," the letter continued, "I need you to know that my greatest wish for you is joy. Not the careful happiness of someone protecting himself from further loss, but the wide-open joy of someone who believes in love's possibility even after experiencing its fragility. I want you to find someone who sees your gentleness and strength, who appreciates Emma's extraordinary spirit, and who adds laughter to our home, rather than filling it with careful silence." Mark's vision blurred as he read the words that directly addressed fears he had been carrying for 3 years. Sarah had anticipated his struggle with guilt and given him explicit permission to pursue new love. "Promise me," the letter concluded, "that you won't let grief become your identity. Promise me that you'll show Emma what it looks like to heal while honoring what was lost. Promise me that when you find someone who loves you both well, you'll be brave enough to let her into our story instead of treating her as a replacement for what we had. Love isn't diminished by sharing. It's multiplied. Be happy, my darling. Be gloriously, unapologetically happy." The letter was signed, "Forever yours, even when forever changes shape, Sarah." Mark set the letter down with hands that shook with emotion, understanding that Emma had discovered exactly what he needed to read at exactly the right moment. His daughter's matchmaking efforts had been guided by more than childish intuition. She had been acting as Sarah's advocate, ensuring that her mother's wishes for their family's future happiness were fulfilled. "Mommy wanted you to find someone new to love," Emma said quietly. She wrote it right there in her own words. So you don't have to feel guilty about liking Ms. Peterson. You can feel happy instead. Mark pulled Emma into his arms, holding her close while tears of grief and gratitude mingled on his cheeks. His 8-year-old daughter had somehow understood what he had been too frightened to accept: that Sarah's love for him was generous enough to encompass his future happiness with someone else. "Thank you for finding this," he whispered into Emma's hair. "And thank you for caring enough about our family to help me be brave when I was too scared to be brave by myself." "Does this mean you're going to tell Ms. Peterson that you love her?" Emma asked with the practical focus she brought to important planning. Mark laughed through his tears, amazed by his daughter's ability to cut through emotional complexity to essential questions. "I think it means I'm going to stop being afraid of loving her," he replied, "which is the first step toward everything else." That night, Mark called Claire and asked if she would like to have coffee before their planned dinner date. "There's something I'd like to share with you," he said. "Something Emma helped me understand about moving forward without leaving the past behind." When Claire agreed immediately, her voice warm with interest and affection, Mark felt the last of his resistance to new love dissolve. Emma's matchmaking campaign had succeeded not through manipulation, but through her recognition that their family was ready for expansion rather than preservation. Sarah's letter had provided the final permission he needed to embrace possibility without guilt. As he prepared for bed that night, Mark found Sarah's chair by the window and sat quietly in the darkness, holding her letter and thinking about the extraordinary gift she had given him, not just her love during their marriage, but her wisdom about love's capacity for growth and renewal. Tomorrow, he would share this discovery with Claire, and together, they would begin building the kind of happiness that honored the past while embracing the future. In her room, Emma fell asleep with her sparkly purple notebook open to a new page titled Phase 4, Help Dad and Ms. Peterson Plan Their Wedding. Even in sleep, she smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose carefully orchestrated plan had succeeded beyond her most optimistic expectations. The May afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of Riverside Elementary's multi-purpose room, transforming the space that served alternately as cafeteria, gymnasium, and auditorium into a warm amphitheater filled with the anticipatory energy of families gathered for the annual talent show. Folding chairs arranged in neat rows faced a small stage decorated with construction paper flowers and hand-lettered banners proclaiming "Showcase Your Shine" in the enthusiastic rainbow colors that characterized elementary school aesthetic choices. Mark Sullivan sat in the third row, his fingers intertwined with Claire's as they watched Emma adjust the microphone stand for what felt like the 100th time in the past 5 minutes. At 9 years old, Emma had developed the perfectionist tendencies that marked her approach to everything from homework organization to family event planning, and tonight's performance was no exception. She wore a navy blue dress with white flower sand outfit she had selected specifically because it reminded her of spring gardens and new beginning sand. Her hair was braided with small white ribbons that caught the stage lights. "She's nervous," Claire observed quietly, noting the way Emma kept checking the sheet music positioned carefully on the piano bench beside her. "I haven't seen her this anxious about a performance since the Christmas pageant." Mark squeezed Claire's hand, drawing comfort from her presence beside him. The past year had been a gradual process of learning to function as a family unit rather than a carefully managed duo with an increasingly involved third party. Claire had moved into their house 3 months earlier, bringing her books and furniture, and the subtle domestic changes that transformed their bachelor father and daughter routine into something more complex and infinitely richer. "She's been working on this song for weeks," Mark replied, remembering the sounds of piano practice and quiet singing that had filled their evenings. "She won't tell us exactly what it's about, just that it's important and that we'll understand when we hear it." Emma had indeed been secretive about her talent show preparation, practicing at school during lunch breaks and working on lyrics in her room with a privacy that was unusual for someone who typically shared every creative project in exhaustive detail. When asked about the song's content, she had merely smiled with the mysterious expression she wore when orchestrating surprises for the adults in her life. The talent show began with the traditional parade of elementary school performers. Kindergartners singing nursery rhymes with enthusiastic volume that compensated for occasional lapses in melody. Third graders demonstrating magic tricks that relied more on audience generosity than actual illusion. And fifth graders performing coordinated dance routines that showcased their emerging sophistication. Mark and Claire applauded each act with appropriate enthusiasm, while maintaining special attention for Emma's classmates, noting her supportive cheers for friends whose performances preceded her own. "Next up," announced Mrs. Patterson, the music teacher serving as master of ceremonies, "we have Emma Sullivan performing an original composition entitled Love Grows Here." Emma approached the microphone with the poised confidence she had developed over months of public speaking opportunities. From classroom presentations to the brief remarks she had insisted on delivering at her father and Claire's engagement announcement 6 months earlier. She adjusted the microphone once more, positioned her hands on the piano keys, and looked directly at Mark and Claire with an expression that seemed simultaneously nervous and triumphant. "This song is dedicated to my mom, Sarah Sullivan, who taught me that love isn't something that gets used up when you share it," Emma announced clearly, her voice carrying throughout the quiet auditorium. "And to my dad and Claire, who showed me that families can grow in beautiful ways when people are brave enough to let new love in." The opening notes were simple and clear, a melody that Emma had constructed with careful attention to emotional impact rather than technical complexity. Her voice, still carrying the pure quality of childhood but strengthened by months of lessons with Mrs. Patterson, filled the space with unexpected power as she began to sing, "In this house where memories live and breathe, where pictures tell of love and grief, something new is growing here, in the spaces between the tears. Love grows here, in the garden of our hearts, not replacing what was lost, but honoring how new life starts. Love grows here, where the past and future meet. In the courage to begin again, love grows here, love grows here." Mark felt his throat tighten as Emma's words washed over him. The lyrics captured the exact emotional journey their family had traveled, from the careful preservation of grief to the gradual acceptance of new possibilities. Beside him, Claire's hand found his with gentle pressure that anchored him to the present moment while Emma continued her musical storytelling. "There's a woman who came to stay, who sees us with loving eyes. She brings laughter to our days and teaches Dad it's okay to try. She doesn't want to take Mom's place, but makes her own space in our home. Now we're 3 instead of 2, and nobody has to be alone." The second chorus swelled with additional verses about healing and hope, about the ways that love multiplied rather than divided when shared with generous hearts. Emma's performance was not technically perfect, her voice wavered slightly on the higher notes, and her piano accompaniment included minor stumbles that only trained ears would notice. But the emotional authenticity of her delivery transcended any musical imperfections. As the song concluded with a final, held note that demonstrated Emma's growing vocal control, the auditorium erupted in applause that seemed disproportionate to a typical elementary school talent show performance. Parents were wiping their eyes, teachers were applauding with genuine enthusiasm, and several audience members were openly crying at the unexpected sophistication of Emma's musical tribute to their family's transformation. Emma stood beside the piano, her face flushed with the satisfaction of successful performance and the visible relief that accompanied the completion of something important and personally meaningful. She looked directly at Mark and Claire, her expression seeking confirmation that her musical interpretation of their family's story had achieved its intended effect. Mark rose from his seat, still applauding, and Claire followed immediately. Soon the entire auditorium was standing, offering Emma the kind of ovation typically reserved for professional performers rather than 9-year-old children with homemade songs. But Emma's composition had touched something universal about love's capacity for growth and renewal, and the audience was responding to the emotional truth of her message rather than simply the novelty of a child's creative effort. As Emma left the stage, Mark and Claire made their way toward the backstage area where performers were reuniting with their families. Emma emerged from behind the curtain, practically glowing with pride and nervous energy, immediately launching herself into her father's arms, with the uninhibited affection that had become more frequent since Claire's integration into their family routine. "Did you like it?" Emma asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer from their emotional responses during the performance. "Like it?" Mark replied, his voice still thick with the emotions her song had evoked. "Emma, that was extraordinary. I had no idea you understood so much about what we've all experienced together." Claire knelt to Emma's eye level, her green eyes bright, with tears that hadn't quite spilled over. "Sweetheart, that song was one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. The way you captured how love grows and changes without diminishing what came before, it was perfect." Emma beamed with satisfaction that extended beyond typical performance pride. "I wanted to show everyone that our family story isn't sad anymore, even though it started with something really sad. Now, it's about how love gets bigger when you let new people in." As they gathered Emma's performance materials and prepared to leave the auditorium, Mark felt a profound sense of completion, not the ending of their story, but the recognition that they had successfully navigated the most challenging transition and emerged as something stronger and more joyful than what they had been separately. The engagement announcement had occurred 6 months earlier, during the winter festival that Emma had helped orchestrate with her elaborate volunteer coordination schemes. Mark had proposed to Claire in their kitchen on a Thursday evening in December, with Emma serving as both witness and enthusiastic planning consultant. The Ringa simple solitaire that honored Claire's preference for elegant, understated jewelry had been selected with Emma's input during a father-daughter shopping expedition that had involved extensive discussion of symbolic significance and aesthetic preferences. Claire had said yes immediately, though her acceptance had been followed by practical questions about timeline, ceremony preferences, and the complex logistics of blending their lives more officially. The conversation had continued late into the evening, with Emma contributing suggestions about everything from wedding colors to reception venues, with the expertise of someone who had been anticipating this development for over a year. "I think we should have the wedding in our backyard," Emma had announced during one of their early planning sessions, "because that's where our family really lives, and it would be more personal than some fancy place where we don't know anyone." The suggestion had appealed to both Mark and Claire, who had envisioned an intimate ceremony that emphasized their existing relationships rather than the kind of elaborate celebration that might overshadow the significance of their commitment. Their backyard, with its mature oak trees and Emma's various garden projects, provided a setting that felt authentic to their family's character while accommodating the modest guest list they preferred. Wedding planning had proceeded with the same collaborative approach that characterized most of their family decisions. Claire had insisted on including Emma in every significant choice, from invitations to menu selection to the music that would accompany their ceremony. Emma had approached these responsibilities with characteristic thoroughness, creating detailed spreadsheets and comparison charts that would have impressed professional wedding planners. "For the ceremony music, I think we should have Canon in D for when Claire walks down the aisle," Emma had suggested during one of their kitchen table planning sessions. "It's classic and beautiful, and it will make everyone cry in a good way. But for the recessional, we should have something more joyful and celebratory, maybe All You Need Is Love by the Beatles." Mark and Claire had accepted most of Emma's suggestions with gratitude for her investment in their wedding's success, though they had gently redirected some of her more elaborate ideas toward more practical alternatives. Emma's enthusiasm for the event had been both touching and occasionally overwhelming, as she seemed determined to create the perfect celebration for their family's official beginning. The months between engagement and wedding had been filled with the ordinary magic of domestic life, shared among 3 people who had learned to function as an integrated unit. Claire's presence in their daily routines had become so natural that Mark could barely remember the careful choreography required for single parenting. Mornings now included 3 sets of plans to coordinate. Evening conversations involved multiple perspectives on daily events, and weekend activities reflected shared interests rather than the structured entertainment Mark had once planned to fill Emma's time. Emma had adapted to their expanded family structure with the flexibility that seemed to characterize her approach to most changes. She had enthusiastically embraced having Claire as a parental figure, while maintaining the special relationship with Mark that had sustained them through their most difficult years. The balance felt organic rather than forced, allowing each relationship to develop according to its own rhythm while supporting the overall family dynamic. "I used to worry that loving Claire meant loving Dad less," Emma had confided to Mark during one of their bedtime conversations. "But it's not like that at all. It's like having more people to love makes the loving bigger, not smaller." The insight had captured exactly what Mark had discovered about the expansion of their family. Claire's love for Emma didn't compete with his paternal devotion, but complemented it, providing different perspectives and additional emotional support that enriched rather than complicated their relationship. Similarly, his love for Claire felt entirely separate from his continuing love for Sarah, not a replacement or substitute, but an independent source of joy that honored rather than diminished his earlier happiness. The wedding morning arrived with a kind of perfect May weather that seemed designed for outdoor celebrations. Mark woke early in the guest room where he had spent the night in deference to pre-wedding traditions, listening to the sounds of preparation throughout the house as vendors arrived to transform their backyard into a wedding venue. Emma had appointed herself coordinator of morning logistics, ensuring that flowers were arranged according to her detailed specifications and that the string quartet had adequate setup space under the oak tree that would serve as their natural altar. "Dad, you need to eat breakfast even though you're nervous," Emma announced when she found Mark standing at the kitchen window, observing the transformation of their familiar outdoor space into something magical. "Claire is having coffee and toast, and she says you should do the same because weddings require energy." Mark smiled at his daughter's matter-of-fact approach to wedding day emotions. At 9 years old, Emma had become remarkably sophisticated about managing the practical aspects of significant events, though her excitement about the day's importance was evident in her unusually animated demeanor. "How is Claire doing?" Mark asked, curious about his bride's state of mind, but respecting the traditional separation that Emma had insisted they maintain until the ceremony. "She's happy and a little nervous and really excited to marry you," Emma reported, with the efficiency of someone delivering important intelligence. "She said the dress fits perfectly and that she feels like the luckiest person in the world. Also, she wants you to know that she loves you even more today than she did yesterday." The message, delivered with Emma's characteristic directness, sent warmth through Mark's chest that had nothing to do with the morning coffee. After more than a year of learning to love Claire without reservation, the reality of their wedding day felt both momentous and entirely naturally official recognition of a commitment that had been developing gradually through countless small moments of shared domestic life. Guests began arriving at 3:00 p.m., filling their backyard with the kind of intimate gathering that reflected their preference for meaningful celebration over elaborate display. Mark's sister Jennifer and her family had driven from Milwaukee, bringing Emma's cousins, who had appointed themselves unofficial flower girls despite having no official role in the ceremony. Claire's parents had flown in from Portland, along with her younger brother and his wife, creating the kind of multi-generational family presence that transformed their wedding from a simple ceremony into a genuine celebration of extended community. Dr. Elena Martinez and Sophia had arrived early, with Sophia immediately seeking out Emma to discuss the important responsibilities of serving as both maid of honor and master of ceremonies for the event. Emma had insisted on filling both roles, arguing that since she had orchestrated their relationship, she deserved special recognition for her matchmaking success. "Everything looks perfect," Dr. Martinez told Mark, as guests found their seats among the folding chairs arranged in semicircular rows facing the oak tree. "Emma has outdone herself with the planning. This feels like exactly the kind of celebration your family deserves." Mark agreed, surveying the scene that Emma and Claire had created through weeks of careful coordination. White roses and baby's breath adorned the oak tree. String lights were woven through branches to provide gentle illumination as daylight faded, and small potted herbs served as centerpieces that guests could take home as wedding favors. The effect was elegant without being formal, personal without being overly intimate, festive without being overwhelming. At 4:00 p.m., as the string quartet began the processional music Emma had selected, Mark took his position beneath the oak tree beside Father Murphy, the priest from their parish, who had known Sarah and understood the significance of this moment in their family's healing journey. Emma walked down the aisle first, wearing a pale green dress and carrying a small bouquet of white roses, her face radiant with the satisfaction of someone whose long-term planning had achieved perfect execution. "Dearly beloved," Father Murphy began once Emma had taken her position as maid of honor, "we gather today to witness the marriage of Mark and Claire, and to celebrate the love that has brought them together and made their family complete." Claire appeared at the end of the aisle wearing a simple ivory dress that complemented her auburn hair and carried a bouquet of the same white roses that decorated the oak tree. Her father walked beside her with obvious pride, though Claire's attention was focused entirely on Mark with an expression that radiated joy and contentment and absolute certainty about their shared future. As Claire joined Mark beneath the oak tree, Emma stepped forward with the kind of poised confidence she had demonstrated during her talent show performance. "Before Father Murphy continues with the official ceremony," she announced clearly, "I want to say something about why we're all here today." Mark and Claire exchanged glances of amused surprise. This deviation from their planned ceremony was pure Emma, though they trusted her instincts about what their wedding needed to include. "My mom Sarah died when I was 5 years old," Emma continued, her voice carrying throughout the quiet gathering. "For a long time, it was just me and my dad taking care of each other and missing her together. But then Claire came to be my teacher, and I realized that love doesn't run out when you use it. Instead, it grows bigger when you share it with more people." The assembled guests listened with rapt attention as Emma continued her impromptu remarks, her words carrying the kind of emotional wisdom that seemed impossible for someone her age. "Today isn't about replacing the love we had before, but about adding new love to what we already have," Emma explained. "My mom would be so happy to see Dad and Claire getting married, because she always wanted our family to be filled with joy and laughter and people who care about each other." Emma turned to address Mark and Claire directly, her expression serious but radiant. "Dad, you taught me that love means taking care of people even when it's hard, and being brave enough to keep hoping for good things. Claire, you taught me that new people can become family when they love you exactly as you are, without trying to change anything about who you were before they arrived." She paused, pulling a folded piece of paper from the small purse she carried. "I wrote some promises for your wedding because I want to be part of the official ceremony that makes us a real family." Emma unfolded the paper and read with the clear diction that had characterized her talent show performance, "I promise to always remember my mom Sarah and the love she gave us, while also celebrating the new love that Claire brings to our family. I promise to help you both be the best parents and partners you can be, and to tell you when you're being silly about grown-up things that don't really matter. I promise to keep our house full of laughter and music and good books and home-cooked meals and people who care about each other. And I promise to always, always remember that love grows bigger when you share it, not smaller." By the time Emma finished reading her personal vows, there was not a dry eye among the wedding guests. Her spontaneous addition to the ceremony had captured exactly the spirit of their celebration, not just the joining of two adults in marriage, but the official recognition of a family that had been created through love, loss, healing, and hope. Father Murphy resumed the traditional ceremony, with voice slightly thick with emotion. "Mark and Claire, you have already spoken vows more eloquent than any I could provide through the love you've demonstrated for each other and for Emma over the past year. Do you, Mark, take Claire to be your wife, to love and cherish, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Mark replied, his voice strong and certain as he looked at Claire with love that felt infinite and immediate. "Do you, Claire, take Mark to be your husband, to love and cherish, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Claire answered, her smile bright with tears of joy and absolute confidence in their future together. Emma stepped forward with the rings, serving as official ring-bearer in addition to her other ceremonial roles. These rings represent the love that goes in circles, never ending, always growing, she announced, with the authority of someone who had researched the symbolic significance of wedding jewelry. As Mark and Claire exchanged rings and sealed their marriage with a kiss that prompted enthusiastic applause from their gathered family and friends, Emma clapped with particular enthusiasm, her face glowing with the satisfaction of someone whose most important project had achieved complete success. The reception that followed was held in their decorated backyard, with tables arranged beneath string lights and the kind of informal elegance that encouraged conversation and celebration rather than formal entertainment. Emma moved through the gathering like a seasoned hostess, ensuring that guests were comfortable and well-fed while accepting congratulations on her role in bringing the couple together. "I always knew they belonged together," she told anyone who would listen. Sometimes grown-ups need help, recognizing obvious things like compatibility and mutual affection. During the toasts, Emma insisted on being the final speaker, rising from her seat at the head table with the confidence of someone accustomed to public speaking. "I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate our family's wedding," she began, "especially my mom Sarah, who couldn't be here in person, but who I know is happy that we found Claire to love us." She raised her glass of sparkling apple cider in salute to the bride and groom. "To Dad and Claire, who taught me that love is the kind of magic that makes everything better when you're brave enough to believe in it. Thank you for showing me that families can grow in beautiful ways when people open their hearts to new possibilities." As the evening progressed with dancing, conversation, and the kind of joyful celebration that marked truly meaningful occasions, Mark found himself filled with gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment. 3 years earlier, he had been a man defined by loss, carefully managing grief while trying to provide stability for his daughter. Tonight, he was surrounded by family and friends, married to a woman who understood both his past and his future, watching Emma dance with Claire's father while planning their upcoming family vacation to Ireland. "Are you happy?" Claire asked as they swayed together during the last dance of the evening, the string lights creating a magical atmosphere around their backyard dance floor. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Mark replied honestly. "You and Emma have given me a life I didn't know I was allowed to want." Claire smiled with the contentment of someone who had found exactly what she hadn't known she was seeking. "Emma gave us each other. We just had to be smart enough to follow her lead." As the evening concluded, and guests departed with herb centerpieces and memories of one of the most touching weddings they had ever attended, Mark and Claire found themselves alone in their backyard with Emma, who had insisted on helping with cleanup despite her wedding dress and formal shoes. "Are you satisfied with how Operation Make Daddy Smile turned out?" Mark asked his daughter, using the code name she had given her matchmaking campaign. Emma considered the question with the seriousness she devoted to important assessments. "I think it exceeded all projected outcomes," she replied with the technical language she had begun incorporating into her vocabulary. "The happiness metrics are significantly higher than my original goals, and the family integration has been more successful than my most optimistic projections." Claire laughed at Emma's analytical approach to emotional success. "What's your next project, now that you've mastered matchmaking?" Emma's face lit up with sudden inspiration. "Well, Mrs. Henderson next door has been looking very lonely since Mr. Peterson moved to Arizona, and the new music teacher at school seems really nice but sad about something. I think they might be compatible if someone created opportunities for them to discover their mutual interests." Mark and Claire exchanged glances of amused recognition. Emma's matchmaking career was apparently just beginning, and their neighborhood was about to benefit from her expertise in identifying romantic compatibility. As they finally made their way inside their home now, officially the residence of the Sullivan-Peterson family, Mark paused in the living room where Sarah's photograph still held a place of honor on the mantel. For the first time since her death, he looked at the image without the sharp pang of loss that had once accompanied every memory. Instead, he felt gratitude for the love she had given him, the daughter they had created together, and the wisdom she had shared about keeping his heart open to future possibilities. "Thank you," he whispered to the photograph. though whether he was thanking Sarah for her love, her letters, or her implicit blessing of his new marriage, he couldn't say. Perhaps it was all three, woven together into the complex gratitude of someone who had learned that love was indeed the kind of magic that multiplied when shared. Upstairs, as they tucked Emma into bed after her long day of wedding coordination, she made one final observation about their family's evolution. "I think Mommy would really like Claire," she said sleepily. "They both love us the same way, like we're the most important people in the world, even when we're being difficult or asking too many questions." Mark kissed his daughter's forehead, overwhelmed once again by her wisdom and emotional intelligence. "I think you're absolutely right, sweetheart. Sweet dreams." As Mark and Claire finally settled into their own bed as husband and wife, they could hear Emma talking quietly to herself in her room, probably planning her next community improvement project or working through the complex logistics of elementary school social dynamics. The sound had become one of the most comforting parts of their evening routine, evidence of Emma's active mind and secure contentment in their expanded family structure. "She's extraordinary," Claire said, echoing thoughts that Mark carried constantly about his daughter's remarkable character. "She is," Mark agreed. "And she's ours." The possessive pronoun felt natural, and right. Emma belonged to both of them now, just as they belonged to each other, and to the complicated, joyful, ever-expanding definition of family they had created together. Outside their window, the lights from their wedding reception still twinkled in the oak tree, a reminder of the celebration that had marked their official beginning as a family of three. In her room, Emma fell asleep with her sparkly purple notebook open to a new page titled Project Neighborhood Happiness, Phase 1, her mind already working on strategies for spreading the kind of love that had transformed her own family's story from loss into joy. She dreamed of weddings and music and the endless possibilities that existed when people were brave enough to believe in love's capacity for growth and renewal. Mark and Claire's marriage had begun exactly as Emma had planned, with laughter, tears, community support, and the absolute certainty that love was indeed the kind of magic that made everything better when shared among people who understood its value. Their future stretched ahead, filled with ordinary moments and extraordinary joys, with challenges they would face together and victories they would celebrate as a family. Sometimes, as Emma had proven through her careful orchestration of their love story, the smallest hearts did indeed hold the biggest love. And sometimes, that love was exactly what the world needed to heal itself, one carefully planned matchmaking scheme at a time.